There are moments in human history so dark, so unsettling that they don't feel real. They feel like horror movies, like folklore, like something exaggerated over centuries, but they're not. These are documented events, real rituals, and real people with real facts. Aztec human sacrifices. Now picture this. A man is held down on a stone altar at the top of a massive pyramid. Thousands of people are watching below, drums are pounding, incense smoke fills the air. A priest lifts a blade made of volcanic glass, and it's sharper than, modern steel, and in one swift motion, he cuts open this man's chest. Now, his heart is still beating when it's held up to the sun. This wasn't a rare execution, this was a ritual. Now, in the heart of the Aztec capital, which is Tenochtitlan, this is in modern-day Mexico City, human sacrifice was embedded into the religious structure of the empire. The Aztecs believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and in return, humans owed a debt. Now, if they didn't pay this debt, the sun would not rise for them. Now, one of the most infamous events occurred in 1487 during the dedication of the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. Now, historical accounts, including those recorded by Spanish chroniclers and supported by archaeological findings, describe thousands of captives being sacrificed over several days. Victims were typically prisoners of war. They were marched up the steep steps of the pyramid. Their chests were open with obsidian blades, and their hearts were removed and offered to Huitzilopochtli, now the son of war god. Now, their bodies were then thrown down the steps, sometimes dismembered and sometimes not. Archaeologists have uncovered skull racks called Tzizompantli, now where thousands of human skulls were displayed publicly. Now, this wasn't hidden, it wasn't secret, it was public and ceremonial and normalized. And while some historians debate the exact numbers, there is no debate about whether it happened because we know that it did. Adolfo Constanzo, now this is the narco cult that assassinated for protection. Let's jump to 1989. A college student from Texas goes on spring break in Mexico and disappears. Weeks later, authorities discover a ranch filled with ritual objects. These are tools, animal remains, and a shallow grave. The student was Mark Kilroy, and this wasn't just cartel violence, it was ritual assassinations. Now, Adolfo Constanzo was a Cuban-American cult leader operating in Mexico. He practiced Palo Mayombe, an Afro-Caribbean religion that involves spirit communication through sacred cauldrons known as nagnas. Now, he twisted it into something much darker. He convinced illegal substance border distributors that human sacrifice would grant them protection from anything. Now, invisibility from police as well as supernatural powers. His followers stole victims, some random, some chosen for specific traits, and they were tormented and unalived in ritual ceremonies meant to feed the spirits. When police raided the ranch, they basically found human remains buried on the property. Authorities connected Constanzo and his group to at least 20 ritual assassinations. Mark Kilroy's demise brought international attention, though. His brain had been removed, his legs were broken, and the scene was described by investigators as ritualistic and deliberate. Now, Constanzo fled but was later tracked to an apartment in Mexico City, and when police closed in, he ordered one of his followers to fire at him rather than be captured alive. This wasn't medieval history, this was the late 1980s. The Altamira ritual horrors in Brazil. Now, between 1989 and 1993, boys began disappearing in Altamira, Brazil. Not just vanishing, they were found mutilated, and several victims who were quite young were discovered with severe injuries that investigators described as ritualistic in nature. Some had been emasculated, many were taken in similar patterns. The crimes terrified the region, and eventually authorities arrested multiple suspects connected to what prosecutors described as a sect with occult beliefs. Now, the group was linked to something called the Superior Universal lineage, and investigators argued that these were ritual sacrifices tied to black magic practices. This brutality shocked Brazil and remains one of the country's most disturbing criminal cases. The Order of the Solar Temple. This is mass assassination by ritual design. Now, imagine walking into a house and finding bodies arranged in a star formation, all wearing ceremonial robes, and they're all deceased. Now, in 1994, authorities in Switzerland and Canada uncovered something very deeply disturbing. Members of a secretive group called the Order of the Solar Temple had participated in what leaders described as a transit to a higher spiritual plane. Now, in reality, it was orchestrated mass self-inflicted demises, and in some cases, assassination. Now, the cult blended like apocalyptic Christianity, Knights Templar mythology, and New Age beliefs about ascending to another star system. Leaders Luke Jewer and Joseph de Mambro convinced followers that Earth was doomed and that being deceased would allow them to kind of reincarnate on a higher plane near the star Sirius. Over several coordinated events between 1994 and 1997, 74 people passed away across Switzerland, France, as well as Canada. Some were hit, some were poisoned, some's homes were set on fire with the bodies inside, and young people were amongst the deceased. Now, investigations later revealed financial manipulation, psychological control, and staged ritual settings designed to reinforce belief. This wasn't chaos, it was choreographed. The Tata-Risio case, this is grave robbery and black magic in Finland. Now, let's rewind to 1930s Finland. Residents near Helsinki began reporting something horrifying. Graves were disturbed, coffins were opened, body parts were missing. Eventually, investigators traced the crimes to a group practicing occult rituals at a swampy spring known as Tata-Risio. Now, human hands, feet, and even skulls had been stolen from Malmi Cemetery and submerged in water during black magic ceremonies. The group believed the spring had supernatural properties. They claimed the rituals could heal illnesses, influence court cases, and grant spiritual powers. The media called one of the central figures Noita Kallio, meaning Kallio the witch. Now, this wasn't mass assassinations, but it was ritual desecration of human remains for occult purposes, and it became one of Finland's most infamous criminal cases. So these cases span centuries and continents, different cultures, different beliefs, different motivations, but the common thread in this is this: when absolute belief in supernatural power overrides morality, history shows us exactly how dark things can become. And I mean, the scariest part of all this is that these aren't legends, they actually happen, and that's what makes them completely unforgettable. The haunting of Jure Grando, now the first recorded vampire in European history. People said his corpse knocked on doors. They said anyone who heard that knock passed away within days. And when villagers finally opened his coffin 16 years after his passing, they swore the body inside was warm, supple, and smiling. This is the nightmare of Jure Grando Alelovic, the first man ever documented as a vampire in European written history. So Grando lived in the small 17th century village of Kringa in what is now Croatia. He was a poor stones mason, a husband, a father, and according to the entire region, a terror after his passing. He passed away in 1656, but the horror began only after he was buried. Not long after the funeral, the villagers claimed they began hearing knocks at their doors in the middle of the night, slow, deliberate, unnervingly human. And as the story goes, whoever's door he knocked on would fall sick and pass away shortly after. The pattern repeated at least half a dozen times, and by then the entire village believed something evil was walking amongst them. Even worse was what happened to his widow. She claimed her deceased husband appeared in her home at night, his skin gray and pulled tight over the bone, his mouth twisted into a strange smile, and that he, in her words, forced himself upon her. She described him reeking of decay with breath colder than winter air. For 16 years, this continued. People just passed away. Crops failed. Parents refused to let their children outside after sundown. Finally, the terrified villagers went to their priest, who assembled a group of 9 men to confront the grave. When they dug up his coffin, they were shocked. They reported that his body looked fresh, untouched by decay, with new growth of hair and nails, and a peaceful smile on his face. The priest attempted to pierce his heart with a wooden stake, but the stake bounced off as if, the chest were made of stone. Only when the men physically restrained the corpse and sawed off his head did the terror end. Witnesses claimed a scream came from the body and that a gush of red liquid poured out onto the ground as if he were alive and hemorrhaging. This case became one of the first formally documented vampire encounters in European history, written by the chronicler Johann Weckhard von Valvassor. The Vampire Panic of Peter Blagojevic, if I'm saying that right, the case that introduced the word vampire to the Western world. 9 people passed away in 9 days. Every one of them claimed they were asphyxiated at night by the same man, a man who had been deceased and buried. This is the vampire panic of Petar Blažević, the event that brought the word vampire into the Western European vocabulary. In 1725, in a small Serbian village under Habsburg rule, an old peasant named Petar Blažević passed away. He was buried without any suspicion, but within a week, his passings began. The first was his own son, who reportedly claimed his deceased father appeared in the night and demanded food. When the son refused, the apparition lunged at him and began basically like asphyxiating him. Now, and the young man passed away the next day. Then came more victims. Each person who passed away claimed the same thing before passing away, that Petar was visiting them at night, sitting on their chest and crushing the life out of them. Panic exploded through the community, and the villagers began, or basically begged the local Austrian authority for permission to exhume Petar's grave. When the officials dug up the coffin, they recorded that Petar's body looked fresh, his skin flushed, his beard appearing longer than a burial, and most disturbing, blood pooled around his mouth as though he had fed recently. Believing the body to be vampiric, if that's the word, they drove a stake through his heart. Now, according to the written account, the moment the stake pierced his chest, the corpse emitted a loud groan and fresh liquid gushed from the wound. This story became the first widely circulated newspaper report of a vampire, which directly led to the spread of vampire folklore across Europe, influencing everything from 18th century literature to the later Gothic era. The exorcism of Anna Euclid. Now, this is the woman witnesses called demon-possessed beyond human understanding. The priest said she levitated. They said she hissed in languages she never learned. Witnesses said her body bent backwards so far that her head nearly touched her heels. This is the terrifying case of Anna Euclid, one of the most disturbing possession accounts in American history. Anna was born in the late 1800s in Wisconsin. By her teens, she reported hearing voices, having violent urges, and being physically unable to enter a church. Whenever she tried, her body would seize and she would just spit, snarl, or collapse. Local priests believe she had been cursed by her own father and aunt, both alleged to have practiced dark rituals. After an initial exorcism attempt, Anna improved for a while until everything suddenly got worse. In 1928, Anna was taken to a convent in Iowa for a series of exorcisms that lasted 23 days. What happened inside that convent terrified everyone who witnessed it. During the sessions, Anna reportedly spoke in Latin, German, and languages she had no way of knowing, screamed blasphemies with multiple voices at once, vomited objects including debris of what looked like tobacco leaves, clung to the walls like an animal, levitated off her bed for several minutes, twisted her limbs into impossible angles without breaking them, revealed secrets about the priest's private lives, refused food, yet her body did not weaken at times. And there was certain times where her body even reportedly became so heavy that 4 grown men couldn't even move her. Other times she was thrown violently across the room by forces that no one could see. The priests involved described the experience as inhuman, beyond earthly understanding, and a battle with something ancient. Now, after the final ritual, Anna collapsed, then opened her eyes as if waking up from a nightmare. Witnesses said her demeanor changed instantly, and the torment that, had plagued her for decades finally ended. The case remains one of the most cited possession events in 20th century Catholic records. The horrors beneath the plague houses. This is the vampire of Venice. When workers drained parts of a 16th century plague pit in Venice, they found a skull with a large brick jammed between the teeth, a vampire skull, according to historians who study ancient anti-vampire rituals. This discovery exposed a terrifying belief from Europe's past that plague victims could rise again hungry. The plague pits of Venice were mass graves dug during the Black Death. Now, bodies were thrown in by the thousands, but the deceased didn't always stay quiet. When more bodies were added weeks or months later, gravediggers sometimes discovered corpses that appeared to have moved, with red liquid around the mouth or bloated stomachs that made it look like they've been feeding. Now, of course, we know decomposition causes these effects, but to, terrified 16th century Venetians, these signs meant only one thing: the deceased were rising causing and eating the living. When the infamous vampire skull was unearthed, researchers discovered the body belonged to a woman. Historical records call these types of corpses shroud eaters. People believed to, wake inside their grave, chew through their burial cloth, and then rise to feed on the living. The brick in her mouth was an anti-vampire measure meant to stop her from chewing and prevent her return. This discovery proved that Venice once practiced full-blown anti-vampire rituals, not in myth, but in documented history. The demon of the Loudun possessions, this is when an entire covenant claimed they were tormented by a devil. Nuns screamed in the streets, they convulsed, crawled on walls, and accused a priest of controlling them through demonic forces. The entire town of Loudun, France was swept into mass hysteria, or a genuine demonic event, depending on who you ask. Now, in the 1630s, the Ursuline nuns of Loudun began experiencing violent hallucinations, seizures, and night terrors. They screamed that they were being visited by invisible entities in the night, grabbed, scratched, and basically attacked by demonic forces. When doctors and priests questioned them, the nuns named a local priest, Urbain Grandier. Now, they claimed he used sorcery to summon demons or to torment them, basically. Now, during the public exorcisms, which drew massive crowds, the nuns thrashed, shrieked, and shouted obscenities, spoke in different voices, and contorted their bodies. Some claimed to levitate, others exhibited impossible strength. What made the case more disturbing is that these possessions happened in synchronized waves, multiple nuns collapsing at once or launching into identical fits as if they were controlled by one force. The possessions gripped the town for years. Grandier was eventually accused of witchcraft. He was tormented and executed. But to this day, historians debate whether the events were either political manipulation, mass psychological illness, religious hysteria, or a genuine coordinated demonic phenomenon. Now, the Loudun possessions remain one of the most detailed mass possession records in history.
So Roche-Thériault was the self-proclaimed Moses to his faithful flock, the anthill. If you think I forgot a word there, it was intentional, so I don't get in trouble. This cult's journey began with a twisted prophecy woven from a belief in the apocalypse. As a youngster, Thériault dropped out of school and started teaching himself the Old Testament. He was convinced that a war between good and evil was about to come. And, well, what's it gonna do? Bring about the end of the world. How'd you know? Thus, he converted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and lived by their rules. No tobacco, no unhealthy foods, no booze, no substances, nada, no vices. Thériault was a charismatic man. He was good at persuading others to do his bidding. Now, while organizing seminars for the Adventists, he convinced an entire group of people to quit their jobs and form his religious following. Now, he formed this commune in 1977, and it initially promised sin-free utopia and unity. Sounds perfect. He was no longer Roche to the world. He was Moses. So, how do we sustain this idyllic life? The sale of baked goods. But behind the bustling bakeries, Thériault's grip tightened with increasingly cruel and bizarre rules. Members were forbidden from speaking without his presence and cut off from their families entirely. Also, Buddy developed a drinking problem, which went against all of his previous beliefs. He also started spying on his followers, and if you didn't seem devoted enough, he's gonna punish you. If you want to leave, well, he's going to be enraged. And the horror didn't stop with the psychological harm. He would often discipline his followers by becoming a self-proclaimed surgeon, using crude tools like kitchen utensils, pliers, and blowtorches to mutilate his followers. And blowtorches to harm his followers. Limbs, teeth, fingers, and toes were all sacrificed. He'd ordered the faithful to break their own legs, fire at each other, and endure inhuman practices like eating what they put out. Insects and rats. Even his own offspring weren't spared. One passed away during a botched circumcision, and the other was left to perish in a blizzard. As the well-being of his seminars decreased, well, Thériault became more and more convinced of his godly delusions. It became apparent to him that the world would end in 1979, and he drove his commune into the Canadian wilderness, convinced that, for some reason, God would skip a chance to destroy Quebec. So 1979 came and went, but the world didn't really end. Now, Moses explained this away by saying our world and God's world run on different time zones. However, this crazy explanation actually didn't stop his followers from romanticizing him and proclaiming him as their absolute leader. Now, in the Canadian wilderness and later the woods of Ontario, his female concubines bore him 26 new followers. Now, Moses, as the ultimate effed up cult leader would harm his descendants and welfare authorities would come and take them away. It took a near-death escape by Gabrielle Lavallée to expose the horrors of the anthill. Gabrielle endured unimaginable acts. We're talking hypodermic syringes in her spine, torches to her no region, and amputations. Now, in 1989, the cult's torment finally ended, with Thériault imprisoned for life. And in 2011, another inmate took his life. So, a figure emerged in the 1970s that would captivate the hearts and minds of thousands. Chandra Mohan Jain, known to his followers as Osho, embarked on a journey that would create the Rajneesh movement. Now, this movement was controversial at the time, due to the founders' hostility, first to Hindu morality in India, and later to Christian morality in the US. In the Soviet Union, the movement was banned as being contrary to positive aspects of Indian culture and to the aims of the protest movement in Western countries. Now, the positive aspects were allegedly being subverted by the leader, whom the Soviet government considered a reactionary ideologue of the monopolistic bourgeoisie of India and a promoter of consumerism in a traditional Hindu guise. Osho's quest began in India, where his teachings carried a unique brand of controversy. He criticized Gandhi and really opposed state-sanctioned marriage. For him, love was meant to be free, unburdened by the chains of traditional wedlock. As he gained followers, he only got more power. His followers wore specific robes and adopted new names. So our leader, Osho, originally became Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, the leader of this crazy movement. And his original teachings eventually twisted into greed and killing. Now, the movement thrived, accumulating wealth through a myriad of business enterprises. Osho's obsession with the Rolls Royce began to reflect a new message, that wealth and spirituality could coexist. But then, as things do, they took a turn for the worse. At the peak of these tensions, a circle of leading members of the Oregon Commune was arrested for crimes including an attempted assassination plot to kill U.S. Attorney Charles H. Turner, and the United States' first ever recorded bioharm attack calculated to influence the outcome of a local election in their favor. Granted, these efforts ultimately failed. In this bio-attack, Salmonella bacteria was deployed to infect salad products in local restaurants and shops, which poisoned several hundred people. Osho was deported from the US in 1985 as part of his Alford plea deal following the convictions of his staff and right-hand man who were found guilty of the attack. After his deportation, 21 countries denied him entry, and the movement's headquarters eventually returned to India, and the Oregon Commune was destroyed in September of 1985. Now, Osho's legacy lives on, The 12 tribes began under the leadership of Albert Eugene Spriggs. Now, this cult, founded in 1972, has been responsible for manipulative tactics that trapped thousands beneath the facade of communal living. The origins of the 12 tribes movement can reportedly be tracked back to the Light Brigade ministry that operated out of the Lighthouse, which was a small coffee shop in the home of Gene Spriggs and wife Marcia. Now, the Light Brigade began living, communally, and opened a restaurant, which was called the Yellow Deli, while its members were attending several churches, before they all decided to join the First Presbyterian Church. Now, members of this brigade, well affiliated with the First Presbyterian, kinda caused friction within its establishment. What did they do? Well, they brought in anybody who was willing to come with them, including members of, different social classes, different racial groups, a practice which, wasn't really engaged in at the time. On January 12th of 1975, the group arrived at First Presbyterian only to find that the service had been canceled for the Super Bowl, and this led the group to form the Vine Christian Community Church. During this time, the group planted churches, each with its own Yellow Deli, in Dalton and Trenton, Georgia, in Alabama, and in Dayton, Tennessee. Their withdrawal from the religious mainstream turned what had once been a friction-filled relationship into an outcry against them. They began holding their own services, which they called Critical Mass, in Warner Park in Chattanooga, appointing elders and baptizing people outside of any denominational authority. The 12 tribes' beliefs resemble those of Christian fundamentalism, the Hebrew Roots movement, Judaism, and the Sacred Name movement. However, the group believes that all other denominations are fallen, and it therefore refuses to align itself with any denomination or movement. The group has strict courtship rules, and overall just really strict everything rules. So, folks become subject to rules dictating the number of toilet paper sheets you can use, also the shape of your eyeglasses, new members are forced to relinquish their identities, any property, and any ties to the outside world. This group takes manipulation to the extremes, particularly when it comes to younger members. Their relentless use of excessive corporal punishment is nothing short of barbaric. Folks that aren't even old enough to talk yet are subjected to painful spankings with thin wooden rods, all justified by twisted interpretations of biblical principles. Now, if you're gonna leave, you're gonna face some coercion and horrific threats. Those who summon the courage to escape, like John Post, face a wall of cult members who block their exit. The 12 Tribes' really awful history of young member harm allegations is one of their darkest secrets. While the cult publicly condemns intercourse-related harm, its internal handling of such cases tends to be shrouded in secrecy and denial. Allegations are often swept under the rug, with the accused being forgiven. Young members who report harm face disbelief, blame, and punishment, perpetuating a culture of silence and terror. The group supports itself through the operation of several businesses, most of which revolve around agriculture, as well as those cafes and restaurants I mentioned earlier. And how do they do that? Using unpaid and less than legal age labor. Thousands of Tokyo commuters stepped out into a spring morning in March of 1995. Well, a doomsday cult known as Shinrikyo embarked on a diabolical journey. Now, if you were just a commuter, it was like an ordinary day. But this cult had laid the groundwork for horror. 5 bags filled with a liquid nerve agent were strategically placed on the city's busy underground systems. And as the packages leaked, stinging fumes really harmed innocent passengers. Within moments, the nerve agent, which sarin gas, kind of took its toll. 13 died, over 5,800 people suffered, some folks were left blind and paralyzed. It was the worst domestic harm attack on Japanese soil. Now, this cult's name, Shinrikyo, meaning Supreme Truth, emerged in the 1980s as a spiritual fusion of Hindu, Buddhist, and apocalyptic Christian beliefs. Their leader, Shoko Asahara, proclaimed himself the Christ. Asahara was sentenced to death in 2004 for the attacks, and his final appeal failed in 2011. And in June of 2012, his execution was postponed due to further arrests of members. He was ultimately executed in 2018. The Matamoros cult, led by Adolfo de Jesus Costanzo in Mexico, was a twisted version of the Palo Mayombe tradition. His cult members nicknamed him the Godfather, or El Padrino, and he led this cult with Sarah Aldrete, who was called the Godmother, or La Madrina. Costanzo's mother had groomed him for darkness. She had invoked the supernatural, she sacrificed animals, you name it. Now Costanzo, he manipulated local kingpins, promising them immunity from law enforcement through his dark rituals. He lured unsuspecting victims to perform really awful human sacrifices at his ranch. Eventually victims were exhumed and they found some really bad stuff. Costanzo and his high priestess eluded capture though. Authorities resorted to burning the cult's shack, metaphorically smoking Costanzo out of hiding. And a violent standoff resulted in his death and the arrest of several cult members. Now I'm starting off today's list with the first person that came to my mind, the Great Rasputin. Close family friend of the last royal Russian family, he was originally introduced to them as a faith healer who could aid their only son, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. A self-described mystic and holy man, Rasputin was a figure of much debate amongst the royal court, with some describing him as a visionary and prophet, others as a charlatan and scam artist. Historians believe that his scandalous reputation and influence over the Romanovs only helped to discredit and overthrow the family. Having taken many pilgrimages to holy monasteries, he developed a reputation as a revered holy man, gaining a small circle of followers who believed in his miracles, and began leading private prayer meetings, much to the scorn and suspicion of villagers and priests. It was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing him before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that they had joined a religious sect whose rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s, where he developed many friendships with high-ranking religious leaders, eventually leading to his introduction to the royal family. It's not certain when Rasputin first acted as Alexei's healer, with the earliest record on date being when he was summoned by Alexandra to pray for Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907, with the young royal healing by the next morning. Due to his closeness with the family, Rasputin was allowed intimate access to the family, in situations that governesses to the young royals described as inappropriate. One governess in particular was released from her position simply for voicing her concerns about Rasputin being allowed around the young ones while they were clad in nothing but their nightgowns. Another one of the nursery governesses claimed in the spring of 1910 that she was seduced into sexual acts against her will by Rasputin, originally having been a devotee of the man, but was later disillusioned by him. The empress refused refused to believe her and said that everything Rasputin does is holy, later dismissing the governess. It was whispered in society that Rasputin had seduced not only the Tsarina, but also the 4 young Grand Duchesses. Rasputin had released passionate letters written to him by the Tsarina and the 4 Grand Duchesses throughout society. In 1916, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov banded together, deciding to assassinate the holy man for his influence over the Tsarina and her family. It is said that the prince invited Rasputin to his place shortly after midnight, where he offered the man tea and cakes which had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin initially said no, but then began to eat the cakes, and to Felix's surprise, appeared unaffected by the poison. Then he asked for wine, which had also obviously been poisoned, drank 3 glasses, and still showed no signs of distress. So around 2:30 in the morning, Felix excused himself to go upstairs, where his fellow conspirators were waiting, and he grabbed a revolver and returned to the basement, telling Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to a crucifix in the room, then, nailed him once in the chest. Rasputin leapt up from the explosive and attacked Felix, who freed himself with some effort and fled upstairs. Rasputin followed Felix, where he was once again impaled with an explosive, and he collapsed into a snowbank. The group of men that wrapped his body in cloth drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and then, they all dropped it in the Malaya Nevka River. If you missed something there, it took a combination of cyanide, multiple rounds of explosives, and drowning before Rasputin met the end of time. There's no way that wasn't witchcraft. Okay, we're gonna move on before I see his face in my nightmares tonight. I already had one last night, I don't need more. So when it comes to history, some folks stand out for being a hero. Great virtue. Nobody today, though. They're all going to stand out for their descent into darkness. Mary Bateman, a woman born in Assenbury, Yorkshire in 1768, was kind of that sort of person. Her life, detailed in The Extraordinary Life and Character of Mary Bateman, fitting title, reads like a macabre tale of deceit, poison, and a chilling transformation from a seemingly ordinary existence to a practitioner of dark arts. Raised on a farm, Mary transitioned from a farm girl to a servant in Thirsk when she reached her teens. Her life took an ominous turn when she was 20, and she moved to York and worked as a dressmaker. A year later, she found herself entangled in a burglary and subsequently fled to Leeds. Over the following years, Mary's occupation shifted from mantua maker to fortune teller and wise woman, gradually building her reputation in the shadows. In 1792, she married John Bateman, but her criminal inclinations persisted. Robberies, prison escapes, even accusations of working as an abortionist marked her darker exploits. Her criminal activities continued even after her marriage, as she roamed the streets of Leeds, posing as a charitable soul, collecting goods for fire victims, only to keep the gifts for herself. In a peculiar twist, Mary joined the followers of the prophetess Joanna Southcott in 1806. She orchestrated the infamous prophet hen of Leeds hoax, claiming that eggs laid by a hen bore apocalyptic messages. A penny was the price of admission to witness these so-called prophetic eggs. However, the truth behind the spectacle revealed Mary's deceitful hand. She had written on the eggs using ink and cunningly reinserted them into the hen. The year 1806 marked another dark chapter in Mary's life when she was approached by William and Rebecca Perigo. Claiming Rebecca was under a spell, Mary began feeding them poisoned pudding, leading to Rebecca's demise in 1808. William accused Mary of both poisoning his wife and defrauding them for charms and cures. Mary's trial in York in March of 1809 painted a picture of a cunning and malevolent woman. The jury swiftly found her guilty of fraud and Rebecca's, death. Facing execution, Mary attempted to evade, rope necklace by declaring pregnancy. A panel of matrons assessed her claim, but the jury of women found it false. So on March 20th, Mary met her end at the gallows alongside a couple of men. Oh, but her story does not end here. I wish it did. The after-death fate of Mary Bateman took a gruesome turn, so after her execution, her body was displayed at Leeds General Infirmary, charging visitors for the macabre spectacle. Dissected by William Hay, her remains became a commodity. Strips of her skin were turned into charms, and the tip of her tongue became a morbid keepsake. No thanks. Next up, we have Walpurga Hosmanen. So her life at first glance was kind of unremarkable. Born in Bavaria between 1510 and 1527, she spent her days as a midwife, aiding her community. But of course, she couldn't be good, or else she wouldn't be here. The story took a dark turn in 1587 when she became one of the subjects of a ruthless witch trial in Germany. Now, the charges against her were nothing short of horrifying. Witchcraft, sorcery, even vampirism. Under punishment, she confessed to a bizarre tale involving a demon named Federlin, who appeared to her in the guise of a male co-worker. She claimed this demon led her to pledge allegiance to the devil, promising to free her from poverty. As she recounted in her confession, she had indulged in macabre rituals with Federlin and the devil himself, consuming the roasted flesh of young humans and drinking wine. She described frequent visits to the devil and her demon lover, often engaging in sexual encounters. You do what you do. Remarkably, she had the power to make her demon lover leave by simply invoking the name of Jesus. Hey, if it works, it works. Now, her confession also included acts of harm using a magical ointment that she had received from her demon lover. This ointment was used to end the lives of many, including the young and animals. Her list of alleged victims was extensive, including 41 young humans, 2 laboring mothers, and a variety of animals. The swift and unanimous decision of the authorities led to her conviction and a gruesome sentence. Before her execution by burning, she endured multiple branding ceremonies, and her right hand, the very hand she had used as a midwife, was severed. Finally, she met her end at the stake, and her ashes were discarded into a stream. Goodbye. Off you go. Time to travel over to Paris, France, where we meet La Voisin, also known as Catherine Deschaise. Not a lot is known about her early life. She learned fortune telling when she was young and later married Antoine Montvoisin, who was active as a jeweler and silk merchant with a shop at Pont-Marie in Paris. When her husband's trade business led to bankruptcy, La Voisin supported the family by practicing chiromancy and face reading. In addition to being a fortune teller, she was also active as a midwife, which developed into providing abortions. Her business as a fortune teller gradually developed into manufacturing and selling purported magical objects and potions, also arranging black masses and selling aphrodisiacs and poison to profit from her clients' wishes upon their future. She supported a family of 6, though, including her husband, her mother, and her offspring. She was known to have at least 6 lovers: the executioner André Guillaume, Monsieur Latour, Vicomte de Cousseran, the Comte de la Bâtie, the alchemist Blessis, the architect Fauché, and the magician Adam Lesage. She was, once again, a French fortune teller, commissioned poisoner, I'm going to emphasize that, and a professional provider of alleged sorcery. She was the head of a network in Paris of witches. So that's how she provided all those poisons, aphrodisiacs, magical services, black masses. She had like a whole network going for her. Her organization of commissioned black magic and poison killings was suspected to have killed over 1,000 people, but it's actually believed that around 2,500 people might have met their ends because of her. Yikes! Oh, and by the way, she was a central figure in the famous Affaire de Poison, in case you didn't know. And because I'm in a fun mood today, let's end this with another male wit. Folks really don't like to talk about that in textbooks, but they did exist. So Gilles Garnier was a reclusive loner living in the woods around Dole France. Despite being a solitary man, he did marry in 1572. Now, historians have reported that Gilles was ill-equipped to provide for his family because he wasn't a really good hunter, since he only really was known to hunt for himself. So that's when he started hunting something else. Anybody want to guess what? Come on. Yeah, human flesh. The first hunt happened around September 29th of 1572 when Garnier killed a young female, allegedly while in the form of a wolf, and brought some of the flesh home for his wife to eat. How thoughtful. Throughout the autumn, more young humans were found unalived and mutilated, including another young woman that Garnier bit and clawed at, but was interrupted by passerbys before fleeing. Sadly, the girl succumbed to her injuries a few days later. Now in November, Garnier ended the life of a young man this time, enjoying the flesh from his thighs and belly before tearing off a leg to save for later. I could name more, but I'm feeling a little queasy as it is. Now this caused a stir amongst the townspeople, who believed that it was a werewolf who was committing the horrors. Many folks had witnessed a humanoid-looking wolf near the scenes of the crimes, with the animal darting off once it was aware of being seen. Then in January of 1573, there was one last death. This time villagers heard a young person screaming and the sounds of a wolf, witnessing the wolf attempt to flee the scene, but changing into the form of Garnier as it did. He was then arrested, put on the rack, and confessed to killing the young and consuming their flesh. At his trial, more than 50 people testified, and he was found guilty of lycanthropy, you know, the ability to turn into an animal, and witchcraft. He and his wife were burned at the stake on January 8th of 1573. A witch and werewolf hybrid? Sounds a little too scary for my liking. Unless I'm watching Vampire Diaries, which in that case, Team Damon. Maybe I should do that tonight. How about we kick off today with the origins of the day, way back before it was known as such. So way back when, Romans celebrated the feast of Lupercalia from February 13th to the 15th every year. The men would sacrifice a goat and a dog, and then lash women with the hides of the animals they had just slain. Apparently the Roman romantics were usually very intoxicated and nude, according to experts. Young women would line up for the men to thrash them, under the belief that this would make them fertile. The ancient Romans may also be responsible for the name of our modern day of love. Emperor Claudius II executed 2 men, both named Valentine, on February 14th on different years in the 3rd century. Their martyrdom was honored by the Catholic Church with the celebration of St. Valentine's Day. So as the holiday spread, it evolved. Pope Gelasius I muddled things in the 5th century by combining St. Valentine's Day with Lupercalia to expel the pagan rituals. By the way, Lupercalia is mentioned in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar when Mark Antony is told by Caesar to thrash his wife in the hope that she will become fertile. Alright, I think I'm getting a little muddled. Let me make things clear before we keep moving on. I'm personally very aware that Lupercalia and Valentine's Day are 2 separate holidays, but while Lupercalia can and does exist without the second, Valentine's Day doesn't exist without the other. Sadly, that's the case with a lot of the long-standing pagan holidays that Christianity has been able to warp and bastardize. So this new festival was more of a theatrical interpretation of what it had once been. Experts have mentioned that it was a little more of a boozy revel, but the Christians put clothes back on it. Thankfully, it didn't stop it from being a day of fertility and love. Around the same time, there was another celebration, Gallatin's Day. This meant lover of women, and was likely confused with St. Valentine's Day at some point since they sound so familiar. So as the years went on, the holiday grew sweeter. Folks like Shakespeare romanticized it in their work, and it gained popularity throughout Britain and the rest of Europe. Handmade paper cards became the tokens du jour in the Middle Ages, and eventually the tradition made its way to the New World. The Industrial Revolution ushered in factory-made cards in the 19th century, and in 1913, Hallmark Cards of Kansas City began mass-producing Valentines, and February has not been the same ever since. I just like the pink aesthetic. It's my favorite color. Here's another tradition that originated from Lupercalia, drawing a partner for the day. Alright folks, picture this. It's the 17th century, and you're at this Valentine's Day party. Everybody's all dressed up, we're all having a good time, but then they bring out this vessel, this bowl. Like, think of it like an ancient artifact. And inside there's slips of paper with people's names on it. And when you draw somebody's name, you're stuck with them for the whole evening. No thanks. Under these rules, you could end up spending Valentine's Day with somebody you barely know, or somebody you can't stand. Imagine being paired up with that annoying guy that you don't like, or, I don't know, your ex's friend. No thanks, I'd rather spend the night binge watching rom-coms with my stuffed animals and a candy tray. And like, this whole thing was just a weird matchmaking scheme. Like, if a guy drew a girl's name, he'd usually stick with her instead of the girl who picked his name. Oh yeah, everybody drew an individual name, and they didn't always match up. So then, he's gonna go off with who he wants, and then we're dealing with the aftermath. Like, I get that it was supposed to be fun and all, but it sounds like a recipe for disaster. Imagine being stuck without a partner. I'm getting major picked last for school projects vibes. Also, apparently, people would wear these slips of paper with their partner's names on them for days afterwards. So like, you'd be walking around with like random guy's name pinned to your shirt. Look, if you really liked them, sure, it's cute, it's fun, it's like, oh my god, look. But if not, it's like, yeah, I got Brad. Great. And who knows, maybe some of these forced pairings actually ended up turning into something real, but I'm guessing most of them were just awkward encounters that everybody wanted to forget. So yeah, as cute as Valentine's Day can be with all the chocolates and the flowers, maybe we should leave the lottery thing in the past, where it belongs. I'll take the single Pringle lifestyle over that any day. Okay, picky eaters, this next one might be icky for you. I know with my ADHD, there are just certain things I can't handle, and this might just take the cake today for the grossest thing. So get this, if you were hoping for a proposal on this very special day, or you wanted to strengthen your marriage, there was this wild solution that people thought was gonna work. Brace yourselves, folks. Back in medieval times, folks had this thing called love potions. And it wasn't like some cute little concoction you'd see in a fairy tale, like no fairy godmother here with a cute little pink bottle. These potions were like something out of a modern day horror movie. People would mix together all these random ingredients, and they're like, hey, this is gonna mess with my body's psyche, make me fall head over heels in love, or you're gonna fall in love with me. Yeah, it sounds a little sketchy, right? How about we check out one from the 16th century together? You ready, folks? It involves mashing up earthworms with leeks, and then get this, eating the whole disgusting mess. I'm sorry, who in their right mind thought that would be a good idea? Like, I get they were desperate for love back then, and we still are now, but like, I draw the line at eating earthworms. Can you even imagine trying to serve that to somebody you like? Like, hey babe, I made you a special Valentine's Day dinner. It's earthworm and leek mush. Bon appetit. Yeah, I think that's gonna send anybody running for the hills, not professing their undying love. I'll stick to making my famous double chocolate cookies, or maybe molasses cookies, or chocolate caramel shortbread. We got options. Also, apparently there were some other really icky ingredients in these love potions. We're talking garlic, onions, musk. Like, no thank you, that's stinky. I don't care how much you love somebody, there's no way I'm drinking or eating any kind of concoction that's no. So yeah, as much as I love a good romance, I'll just stick to modern day love rituals. You know, sending cute texts, going on dates, I've heard about those. Maybe indulging in some chocolate covered strawberries. Because let's face it, nothing says I love you like a box of chocolates. Not a potion made of earthworms. Alright, we're moving on before I start yakking on camera. And like, I don't want to mess up my very cute Valentine's Day makeup. I have Galentine's plans later. Is anybody out there a fan of Married at First Sight? Personally, I'm not for a myriad of reasons. For starters, I'm not a big reality TV fan. And the thought of marrying somebody without knowing them first? Between you and me, I have a really bad habit of getting bored with romantic partners, so I can't imagine settling down on a whim. Heck, I can't even imagine like settling down or even dating with my current lifestyle. So apparently there was this whole belief back in the day that on Valentine's Day, women would fall head over heels for the first guy they laid eyes on, to the point where they had to marry them. And like, okay, I'm a Shakespeare girly. He totally played into this in Midsummer's Night Dream. I love talking about this play. It's my favorite work. I've actually been very lucky. I've been in 2 different productions of it in my lifetime. So you know that part where Queen Titania wakes up and she falls madly in love with the guy with the donkey head? Like, yes, Oberon cursed her to fall in love with Bottom, but a trope is a trope. So apparently that was based on some real life Valentine's folklore. I mean, can you even imagine waking up and finding yourself swooning over some random dude with a donkey head? Yeah, no thanks, I'll pass. class. And apparently there's also a British rhyme that goes something like, when I go out, the first swain I see, in spite of fortune shall my true love be. Yeah, I don't think my true love is gonna magically appear just because I happen to lock eyes with somebody on the street. Also, what if the first person you see is like not your type? Are you just supposed to suck it up and settle? Also, because this is all like, oh, I'm gonna fall in love with a guy, it's a little too heteronormative for my liking. There's also this gem from Samuel Pepys' diary in 1662. So apparently his wife was so freaked out about this whole falling in love thing that she walked around on Valentine's Day with her hands over her eyes. Yeah, some people will call those extreme measures, but like, I get it. It's also just some next level paranoia. So yeah, as aesthetically cute as Valentine's Day can be, as you see, I like all the hearts. Maybe we should leave this tradition in the past where it belongs. Like, I'll spend the day with somebody I actually know and like. Thanks! I think it might be best if I end today with something a little more silly and whimsical, a little less horrifying. Is anybody out there a fan of turnips? Not for me, but that might be because I associate it with steamed veggies from dinners growing up, and those were not it. Look, my mother was very fond of using a steamer, and I don't know if our family just kept striking out with lemons, or if she didn't know how to use the damn things, but if you eat enough like too mushy or slightly too hard warmed veggies, you never want to look at warmed veggies ever again. Sorry, I know, back on topic I go. So get this, back in the day when folks threw a Valentine's Day party, it was like the Met Gala of medieval times. Everyone would show up dressed to the nines, having a good time. But here's where it gets a little weird. They would pin these things called tokens to their clothes, which were basically symbols of love. You know, like the infinity sign or cheesy mottos. Like, okay, I guess it's cute, but it's a little much. Don't worry, that's not my point here. There were these love lanterns everywhere. So you'd think, you know, lanterns, okay, soft, romantic, maybe kind of gothic, right? Not so much. These bad boys were made out of hollowed out turnips with candles shoved inside. Because, you know, nothing says let's celebrate our love like a flaming root vegetable. I'm sorry, just like picture this. Walking into a room filled with turnip lanterns flickering in the dim light. For me, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. And don't even get me started on the smell. Like, I bet the whole place reeked of like burnt vegetable wax. Not exactly the most romantic ambiance if you ask me. So yeah, as much as I love a good themed party, I think I'll pass on the whole Middle Ages Valentine's Day vibe.
At number 5, burning at the stake. By far the most well-known punishment for those tried as witches, burning at the stake was a cruel and unusual form of execution used commonly back during the many witch trials of the 17th century. These executions were not only physically agonizing, but also symbolized the depths of human fear and prejudice. One such example of this terrible practice was the Wurzburg witch trials of the 17th century, known as one of the largest witch trials in history. Accused witches faced a horrifying fate at the stake. The authorities believed that fire possessed the purifying power to cleanse the accused of their alleged connections to the devil. In reality, it was a grotesque display of violence. Victims were often tied to wooden stakes in a public square, surrounded by jeering crowds. They were subjected to unimaginable pain as the flames slowly consumed them. The agony of being burnt alive was drawn out, excruciating, and inhumane. What made the burning of witches particularly cruel was the complete absence of credible evidence. The trials were fueled by paranoia, superstition, and hysteria. Accusations were often based on flimsy hearsay, personal grudges, or even just random suspicions. The accused had little chance to defend themselves, and confessions were often extracted through rigorous mental and physical torment. These false confessions only added to the tragedy, as innocent people were forced to implicate themselves and others in a desperate attempt to end their suffering. Furthermore, the persecution of witches during the Wurzburg witch trials, like many other witch hunts, was often intertwined with gender bias. Women, especially those who didn't conform to societal norms, were disproportionately targeted. Accusations of witchcraft could be used to control and punish women who challenged the status quo or were perceived as a threat to male authority. The cruelty of burning witches at the stake was not limited to the physical torment. It was a gruesome spectacle intended to terrify the populace into submission. Public executions were meant to send a message that dissent would not be tolerated and that conformity to prevailing religious and social norms was imperative. The psychological impact on society was profound, as fear and mistrust tore communities apart. The Wurzburg witch trials, like many others, were eventually recognized as a dark chapter in history. They serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious fanaticism, and the absence of due process. Today, we look back on these events with horror and regret, vowing never to repeat the cruelty of burning alleged witches at the stake. It is a somber lesson that underscores the importance of justice, reason, and compassion in our pursuit of a more enlightened society. Next up at number 4, witch cakes. Witch cakes are a bizarre and unsettling aspect of the witch trials that swept through colonial America during the 17th century, as exemplified in the infamous case of Tituba. These cakes, concocted from peculiar ingredients, were believed to possess the power to reveal the presence of witches. While they may seem like a bizarre footnote in history, witch cakes serve as a chilling reminder of the hysteria and irrationality that fueled the witch trials. In the case of Tituba, a slave woman living in Salem, Massachusetts, witch cakes played a central role in her ordeal. Tituba was accused of practicing witchcraft, and her accuser sought a means to expose her supposed demonic affiliations. They decided to bake a witch cake, a crude mixture of rye meal and the urine of the afflicted girls who claimed to be victims of witchcraft. Ew. The logic behind these cakes was deeply flawed and rooted in superstition. It was believed that by feeding the cake to a dog, the dog would act as a conduit, causing the witch to experience pain and reveal their true nature. This bizarre form of witch detection demonstrates the length of which fear and paranoia can drive people to concoct irrational and cruel methods of persecution. Tituba was subjected to this ordeal, and when the dog exhibited unusual behavior, because it was eating urine, it was seen as evidence of her guilt. This marked the beginning of her traumatic journey through the Salem witch trials, which ultimately led to her confession under duress. The use of witch cakes underscores the hysteria and desperation that characterized the witch trials. Accusers and authorities were willing to resort to absurd and unscientific methods to justify their persecution of those they believed to be witches. These methods were not only illogical, but also cruel, as they subjected the accused to public humiliation, physical examinations, and often torment. Number 3. Dunking. Dunking was a cruel and unusual punishment employed during the witch trials that swept through Europe and its colonies in the 16th and 17th centuries, including Northamptonshire, England. This brutal practice, also known as ducking or swimming, was intended to determine an individual's guilt or innocence of witchcraft, but it often resulted in severe physical and psychological suffering. In Northamptonshire and other regions, dunking involved binding the accused witch, often a woman, and lowering her into a body of water, typically a river or pond. The rationale behind this test was rooted in superstition and flawed logic. It was believed that because witches had renounced their baptism, the pure element of water would reject them, causing them to float. If the accused floated, they were seen as guilty of witchcraft. If they sank, they were deemed innocent, but often drowned in the process. Being forcibly dunked into cold water while bound was a terrifying and painful experience. The accused would struggle for air and face the risk of drowning, all while the onlookers watched in morbid anticipation. Dunking was an arbitrary and irrational method of determining guilt. The outcome depended on various factors, such as the accused body's composition and the skill of the dunking implementers. Innocent people could easily be declared guilty, leading to wrongful executions. Despite its cruelty and lack of reliability, dunking persisted in witch trials because it was consistent with the prevailing belief in the supernatural and the desire for swift justice. It was only with the eventual decline of witch hunts and the advent of more rational legal systems that such inhumane practices were abandoned. At number 2, prayer tests. Prayer tests stand as the greatest example of the unjust nature of the witch trials and the persecution of innocent individuals, making it a cruel punishment for anyone put on trial. They were a controversial and often absurd method used during the witch trials to supposedly rule out witches. These tests were grounded in superstition and religious fervor rather than sound evidence. Two notable cases, those of Jane Wenham and George Burroughs, shed light on the use and cruel consequences of such prayer tests during witch trials. Jane Wenham's case is one of the last witch trials in England, occurring in 1712. She was accused of witchcraft in Hertfordshire, and her trial attracted considerable attention due to the changing climate of skepticism regarding witch trials. One of the methods employed to test her guilt or innocence was the prayer test. In Wenham's trial, the prayer test involved having the accused recite the Lord's Prayer without error, usually out of the Bible or other holy texts. It was believed that a witch would be unable to utter the prayer correctly due to their alleged unholy nature. However, this test was deeply flawed and arbitrary, as it ignored the fact that many accused witches were uneducated and might struggle with reading the Lord's Prayer, especially in the intense and stressful environment of a trial. She also underwent dunking in order to test her witchy nature. Fortunately, Jane Wenham was found not guilty, thanks to the rising skepticism surrounding witchcraft. Even when accused of flying, the judge would retort, "Is flying a crime?" which it isn't. Her case is often cited as a turning point in England's witch trials, as it exposed the irrationality and injustice of such proceedings. But in the case of George Burroughs in 1692, he wasn't so lucky. George Burroughs was one of the individuals accused and executed during the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts. His case highlights how the prayer test was used in the American context. In Burroughs' trial, the authorities used the Lord's Prayer as a test of his innocence. They believed that if he couldn't recite it correctly, he must be a witch. Burroughs, to the astonishment of many, recited the prayer flawlessly, challenging the validity of the test. However, the court, fueled by hysteria and prejudice, dismissed this as a trick of the devil. So much for testing him, right? George Burroughs was ultimately convicted and hanged, illustrating how even when an accused individual passed the prayer test, it did not guarantee their acquittal or protection from the witch hunt's irrationality. So yeah, if you were wanted dead back then, you would be made dead. And at number 1, crushing. In the annals of history, the Salem witch trials of 1692 stand as a stark testament to humanity's capacity for cruelty, particularly in the realm of legal punishment. Amid the hysteria that gripped colonial Massachusetts, a plethora of cruel and unusual methods were employed to elicit confessions from the accused witches. Among these harrowing practices, the use of pressing or crushing remains one of the most chilling. The process of pressing was as brutal as it was inhumane. The accused individual would be stripped of all dignity and laid down in a dark, dank cell. Heavy stones or wooden boards, laden with an unimaginable weight, would then be stacked upon their chest. The agony that followed was beyond words. As the relentless pressure bore down, every grasp for breath became a desperate struggle. The rationale behind this method was chillingly simplistic. Those who confessed to their alleged dealings with the devil could halt the pressing, while those who resisted would face an excruciating demise. The authorities, consumed by fear and paranoia, believed that witches, having supposedly consorted with Satan, possessed a supernatural resilience that rendered them impervious to such torment. The cruelty of pressing was evident not only in its physical brutality, but also in its stark absence of due process. Accused witches had no chance to defend themselves, no legal representation, and no recourse to justice. Their fates rested in the hands of accusers and a court swayed by mass hysteria and irrational beliefs. Perhaps the most infamous case of pressing during the Salem witch trials was that of Giles Corey. A resilient and principled man, Corey refused to enter a plea, knowing that doing so would lead to the forfeiture of his property. His stoic resistance, in the face of a slow and agonizing death, made him a symbol of defiance against the unjust trials.
Number 5. The Pyramids and the Sphinx. Famed for giving out riddles to passers-by and would-be kings and keeping even more secrets for itself, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids of Giza aren't just one of the best tourist destinations in the world, they're a source of never-ending speculation. Were they crafted by aliens? Are there hidden secrets lying within the Sphinx that we don't know about? Almost certainly. Let's dissect them a bit. So the Sphinx, if you haven't heard of it, this is your first time hearing about it. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world or something, but this might be the first time. It's a massive limestone statue with a lion's body, and let's be real, it's a nice one at that. And the head of a human. Was it always a human's face? There's some speculation and discussion about that. Some researchers have proposed that originally the Sphinx was a monument to the jackal god Anubis, and that his face was refitted at some point in the image of Amenhotep II, a pharaoh from around that era. Now the purpose and origin remains a point of contention to Egyptologists. What was the Sphinx built for? Is it a tomb? A monument? Just something to take photos of? Some people even speculated that the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. A tomb? A monument? Just something to do? Researchers too have speculated that perhaps the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. Erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body appear consistent with water erosion, rather than wind erosion, raising all sorts of questions about the climate and geological history. Did Egypt used to be like a lot wetter? And that's just what puzzles people on the outside. The inside of the thing is a whole other can of worms. Some propose that there are unexplored passages or secret chambers containing wondrous treasures, ancient texts, sacred artifacts. I think the Master Sword might even be in there. Some people think there's proof of extraterrestrial life. It's a very widespread conspiracy theory that aliens were involved in the Sphinx and the pyramids and are very closely tied to ancient Egyptian culture. Some limited excavations around the Sphinx have been carried out, but because of the delicate nature of the monument, further digging is a bit challenging. You don't want to be the guy who ruined one of the 7 wonders of the world. They're gonna make fun of you forever if that happens. We could do a whole video on the mysteries behind the Sphinx, and I sincerely hope we we do, because we are just scratching the surface of strange stuff going on there. But if you're looking for way more strange stuff, then you already know we have that in spades. We've got just about everything freaky you can think of. We've done a video or two on it. So hit subscribe. Please hit that little bell as well so you make sure to get our videos up to date. Don't miss a single scream, but do that at the end of this video because I got 4 more unsolved mysteries for you coming up right now. Number 4, the Voynich manuscript. The manuscript is one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries out there just for how sheer little we know about it. We have nothing. It's kind of a choose your own adventure for mysteries. Is it aliens? Demons? A really convoluted historical prank? If you don't know, the Voynich manuscript is a strange document written in a handwritten text filled with bizarre illustrations. No one's been able to make sense of it, primarily because it's written in a language that has never been seen elsewhere in human history. It was named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish antiquarian who purchased it in 1912, although its ownership has passed through many hands. So what was it written for, and by who? These are the questions we've been asking, and we're probably going to keep asking over and over. The manuscript is about 240 pages, containing illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, humanoid figures, and other strange objects. Despite countless attempts by cryptographers, no one's been able to crack the code just yet. Some speculation has been made that it could be a biology textbook in an encoded language. Some people think it could be the scrawlings of a brilliant alchemist, magic and spell casting we couldn't possibly hope to understand. Some say it's from a forgotten civilization, while others have said maybe it's all just a load of nonsense and it's just made by someone who had too much time on their hands and a vengeance against historians who wanted to prank them for centuries. The book is thought to have come from anywhere between the 15th century and the 17th century. We don't even know when this thing was written. Like I said, we know next to nothing about it. Now, if you're feeling clever and inspired, you can find a PDF of the Voynich manuscript as a free download pretty easily. Who knows? You might be the one to finally crack this case. But hey, don't be frustrated if you end up falling down a conspiracy rabbit hole many before you have tried. I looked through a few of these pages and it took me 30 seconds before I was looking like Charlie from Always Sunny at the conspiracy wall, all that red tape and stuff. Number 3, the Yonaguni Monument. You've heard of the lost city of Atlantis, surely. Of course you have. It's one of the best Disney movies you forgot about. That's a story for a whole other video. Well, what if it wasn't the only lost underwater city out there? Have you ever heard of the Yonaguni Monument? The Yonaguni Monument has sometimes been called Japan's Atlantis, and it refers to a strange, eerie underwater rock formation just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan that has had people scratching their heads for years. It's a massive structure consisting of several flat rock slabs arranged in a way that seems like an intelligent life put it together. Now, some people say that this structure could be completely natural, resulting from years of erosion and tectonic activity. Certainly, stranger things have happened, and it wouldn't be completely impossible for something to form this way, but the way it exists now, the way it sits, it seems deliberately carved out, and it seems like it was an important structure to someone. Perhaps a monument, a temple, some sign of a lost city, hence the Atlantis comparisons. Is it possible this was evidence of a lost civilization buried beneath the ocean waves, forever forgotten to history? The monument being completely submerged has been fuel for the fire of speculation. Was it always underwater? Did it end up there over time? Did the water raise around it? Did the land used to look significantly different? It makes it pretty difficult to study as well, making it just that little bit more elusive, as if it wasn't mysterious enough as is. But let's be real, it was probably aliens. It was almost certainly aliens. Number 2, the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle. Now there's an exquisite ancient mystery, one of the certified classics, something that's eluded us for years and will probably continue to do so. It's been referred to before as the Devil's Triangle, and it's host to all manner of mysterious incidents and unexplained phenomena. One of the more infamous incidents linked to the Bermuda Triangle is the disappearance of Flight 19 in December 1945. 5 Navy bombers vanished during a routine training mission alongside 14 crew members. Gone. Zilch. There was an extensive search effort, but nothing was ever found. Not so much as a bolt off the hull, a boot fished up, a hat, nothing. It was as if they were swallowed up by the void. Naturally, people went a bit wild with theories on this one. Anything from aliens, electromagnetic anomalies, alternate realities, no clipping into the back room. You know, pretty serious academic stuff. but it's bizarre. Another particularly good Bermuda baffler for you is the case of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the 542-foot-long cargo ship carrying over 300 crew members vanished during its voyage from Barbados. No wreckage, no survivors ever found. Certainly you would think a ship that big with that many people would leave behind a little bit of evidence, right? What happened? Were they swallowed up by the very seas themselves, pulled to Davy Jones's locker by the Kraken? Or are they somewhere we can't reach them, in a place between worlds and time? The region is known for all sorts of weird stuff too, involving electronic malfunctions and compass deviations. It makes it seem like there is just something bad in the air out there. Maybe just bad vibes? Certainly seems that way. And number 1, the Dorset mass grave. Oh, this one is a doozy, and it is one of the scariest and most confusing archaeological discoveries ever found. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? A barrel of Vikings? Well, how about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies? No? Well, you and I find different things fun, I suppose. Way back in the yesteryear of 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find, you know, if they came across an old coin or an old arrowhead or something you can stuff in a museum case. For the first few days of the job, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy discovered until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess they thought that was probably kind of interesting. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that'd be one thing. But the mass grave was wrapped in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well their rib cages, arms, and leg bones were all scattered around, this is disgusting, surrounded by discarded teeth. No clothes or weaponry was recovered. So what in the Allfather's name happened here? Because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. Sounds like Vikings opened up a portal to hell, went really wild with it. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly, which is very interesting. Now, it goes without saying that Viking dental surgery could not have been painless, meaning the process had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or done to themselves to intimidate their opponents to show just how gritty they are. I actually don't know which of those two are preferable. They actually both sound pretty horrible. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a portal to hell and being offered as a sacrifice is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that by looking at the wound patterns on the ribs and torso, they were surgical precise blows, which wasn't really the kind of thing you'd expect from a rabid Viking warrior flailing around a sword in a brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifyingly sadistic ritual, or it was a big-time mass sentencing where everybody was sentenced to the death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone. These men had been brought here from somewhere else and then left here for a long time. We might never know the truth behind the Dorset mass grave, and I'm gonna be honest, that might be fine with me. Some secrets are better left buried. Anyone else feel though that all those Viking skeletons, that might be like the world's most terrifying puzzle to put all that together? Morbid thought.
Number 5. North Brother Island, New York. The North Brother Island is one of 2 small islands located in the East River of New York City. The island remained uninhabited until 1885, with the only trace of humanity being a small lighthouse that was erected in 1869. The island began seeing more use in 1885 when the Riverside Smallpox Hospital moved from Roosevelt Island to North Brother, when their mission expanded to treating and isolating victims of other quarantinable diseases such as typhoid, tuberculosis, and especially polio. In 1904, a steamship called the General Slocum was set ablaze, and over 1,000 people perished, either from the fire or from drowning while trying to escape, and ended up washing ashore on the island. Of course, many people have reported seeing a ghostly steamship in the years since, and sightings of the spectral victims of the fire are reported from afar, with them wandering the beach of the island, seemingly lost and in pain. One of the most famous residents at the hospital was Mary Mallon, otherwise known as Typhoid Mary, who was confined on the island for 20 years until her death in 1938, after being declared a public health menace for infecting between 51 and 122 people while working as a cook. As public health measures like vaccines began to be adopted in the 30s and 40s, the need for a quarantine hospital lessened, to the point where the hospital was closed. It was converted into housing for war veterans who were going to school in the city following World War II, before being converted into a rehabilitation facility for young people suffering from substance abuse issues. But it was closed in 1963 due to the cost of upkeep and the widespread corruption of the staff. In the years since, it was considered for a variety of purposes, including housing for the homeless and an extension of the jail at Rikers Island, but the danger of the unmarked manholes and the advanced dilapidation of the buildings, which are mostly collapsed and overrun by poison ivy, resulted in such ideas being abandoned. It was eventually decided that the site would serve as a bird sanctuary for herons and other wading shorebirds. Although many of the original 25 buildings are still standing in some shape or form, it has been made off limits to the public and is only available for supervised visits for those intending to go ashore for, quote, compelling academic and scientific purposes. With its history of confinement and death, perhaps it is for the best that this site has been deemed unfit for public visitation, although the history of the island is indeed compelling. Number 4. Boblo Island Amusement Park, Ontario. North America has no shortage of amusement parks for families and thrill seekers alike to visit. The Canadian province of Ontario has several to choose from, including Canada's Wonderland, Great Wolf Lodge, and Splashdown Niagara. One theme park that you won't be able to buy a ticket for, however, is the Boblo Island Amusement Park, located on the island of Bois Blanc, just above the mouth of the Detroit River. The park was opened in 1898 and used a ferry system to service guests from Ontario and Detroit and bring them to the island, where they had a variety of attractions to keep them occupied and having fun. Some of these included the Falling Star, a log flume, a theater, a sky tower, Ferris wheel, a zoo, a carousel, and a dance hall, financed by Henry Ford. It also had 3 roller coasters, the Screamer, the Nightmare, and the Sky Streak. It also had Boblo's Scooter boats, which were essentially aquatic bumper cars. The park operated for many years before eventually closing down for financial reasons in late 1993. There are still ferries that operate in order to get island residents on and off the island, but the now abandoned amusement park has been declared off limits by the property owners. Of course, the dilapidated carousel building, dance pavilion, and sky tower have since proven to be too appealing for urban explorers to keep away from, and the eerie, overgrown site still sees a variety of visitors. Like any good amusement park, it of course has a reputation for being haunted by a variety of ghosts. My personal favorite of the ghost stories is the story of Smiley the Magician. Back when the theater still operated and showed a variety of different performers, one of the most consistently booked performers of the 30s and 40s was a magician named Smiley Smilovich. Smiley was an old-school magician who had trained with Houdini in the late 20s and was known for his seemingly death-defying tricks. One of his most famous tricks was a metamorphosis trick, where he would put a trunk on stage, climb into it, lock it, and then have the trunk set on fire. He would escape through a trap door, the trunk would burn away, revealing that he had escaped, and the crowd would go wild. One day he was doing this trick as usual, but when he locked himself in the trunk, he had a heart attack and died. The trunk was then set on fire, and the audience was left in terror as Smiley's body burned in front of them. Ever since then, Smiley's ghost would apparently haunt the theater, being sighted watching shows that were performed there, showing a special interest in magic shows. In the years since the park's closure, the occasional rumor of the magician being spotted has come up from the various urban explorers checking out the overgrown buildings. Would you ever be brave enough to explore Boblo Island Amusement Park? And if you did, would you be on the lookout for spectral magicians? Number 3. Bangar Fort, India. This 17th century fortress has a reputation for being the most haunted place in India, with people refusing to build homes near the fort for fear of falling under its curse. Despite this reputation, there is some debate as to why it is haunted, with 2 very different stories being told. In the first story, a king named Madho Singh wanted to build the fort, but needed the permission of an ascetic monk who lived on the nearby land. The monk granted him permission to build the fort, but warned him that the fort's shadow must never fall upon the monk's home. Madho agreed to these terms and built the fort to the specifications. However, one of his successors added to the fortifications vertically, causing the fort's shadow to engulf the forbidden home, causing the fort to fall to ruin and become haunted. Another version of the tale is that an evil sorcerer fell in love with a beautiful princess named Ratnavati. She rebuffed his advances, so he bewitched a cosmetic that she was going to use that would force her to fall in love with him. She found out about this scheme and poured the cosmetic onto a large boulder, which then crushed the sorcerer. With his dying breath, the sorcerer cursed the fort so that no one would ever be able to live there in peace. The fort is open to the public during the day, but it is forbidden to set foot on the property at night, as that is when the hauntings occur, with several people who have tried to disprove the ghost by staying overnight, going missing, or coming out catatonic. Number 2. The Paris Catacombs. When you consider how many locations like old houses or abandoned mental institutions have a reputation for being haunted due to the discovery of just a few bodies, it comes as no surprise that many of the world's catacombs have apparently been discovered to be haunted by specters of the past. Take for example the Paris Catacombs. Built as a mass grave in the 18th century in order to deal with the overflowing of local cemeteries, the Paris Catacombs hold the remains of millions of Parisians. A few years after being established, Louis-Étienne Héricard decided to make the catacombs a work of art by arranging the bones into elaborate displays. An inscription in the catacombs even reads, "Arrête, c'est ici l'Empire de la Mort," which translates to "Stop, this is the Empire of the Dead." Although a small section of the catacombs are available for visitors to peruse, the vast majority of the seemingly endless tunnels are banned for tourists to visit. In the years since they were constructed, there have been several reports of ghosts wandering the halls of the labyrinth-like grave, searching for a way out. As if that weren't bad enough, rumor has it that if you come into the catacombs at night, you will hear the whispers of all the spirits of the catacombs, trying to convince you to venture deeper and deeper into the catacombs until you become lost and unable to find your way out. Another often reported ghost is that of Philibert Asper, who was a doorman at the Val-de-Grâce hospital, who made his way into the catacombs in late 1793 when he was sent to fetch liquor from a cellar. With only the light of a candle to find his way out, he soon became lost and confused. It is also theorized that he was quite drunk at the time. His candle eventually went out and it became pitch black. He was missing for 11 years before his remains were found and identified due to the hospital keys and the bottle of liquor in his hand. He was interred in the catacombs at the exact location where he was found. In the years since, urban explorers calling themselves cataphiles have reported seeing the spirit of Asper wandering the halls of the catacombs with his candle on the anniversary of him going missing. The cataphiles are known for paying their respects at his grave, and they have named his spirit the protector of the cataphiles. Number 1. Poveglia Island, Italy. In the lagoon between Venice and Lido, you will find the small island known as Poveglia. It was first inhabited in the year 421, when mainlanders relocated to the island to escape barbarian invaders. Due to its small size, the island was easily defensible, and frankly not worth the trouble for invaders to bother attacking. The small community stayed on the island for centuries, enjoying their independence from taxes and laws of the mainland, but their population eventually dwindled, leaving the island uninhabited. This changed in the year 1348, when the bubonic plague was ravaging Venice and the surrounding towns. Poveglia became a quarantine island, with symptomatic Italians being banished there to die. The center of the island had a giant pyre, where tens of thousands of plague victims' bodies were burnt to prevent the spread of the disease. When the plague returned in the year 1630, the island became a quarantine colony, once again, with even more bodies being burnt in the town square. Naturally, the location developed a reputation for being haunted by the tens of thousands of displaced and abandoned plague victims, but the island's creepy history was far from over. Aside from a brief period where Napoleon used the island to store gunpowder, relying on the ghost stories of the place to keep unwanted visitors away, the island remained largely uninhabited until an insane asylum was built on the island in the late 1800s. It was a brutal hospital that was poorly constructed and used more to exile the patients from society than to help rehabilitate them. One of the doctors working there in the 30s conducted strange and cruel experiments on the patients for years, before going mad himself and flinging himself from the bell tower. Though this bell tower was removed years ago, people still claim to hear the sound of the bells emanating from the island. The hospital became an old folks' home briefly, but that closed in 1975, leaving the island completely abandoned. A construction crew tried to restore the hospital, but suddenly stopped, refusing to return to the island due to how intensely haunted the island has become. The government has banned anyone from visiting the island, but its reputation has made it an infamous and terrifying location.
Number 5. The WOW signal. In a 1959 paper, Cornell University's physicists had speculated that any extraterrestrial civilization attempting to communicate with radio signals might use a frequency of 1420 megahertz, which which is naturally emitted by hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. In 1973, after completing an extensive survey of extragalactic radio sources, Ohio State University assigned the Big Ear to the scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence famously known as SETI, giant dish. Think Jodie Foster in Contact. 1977, Jeremy Amon, a SETI volunteer astronomer, was analyzing by hand large amounts of data processed by an old IBM computer. He spots a series of signal intensities and frequencies that left him and his colleagues astonished. The WOW signal was the first radio signal detected from Earth. The signal came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. Amon discovered the anomaly a few days later while reviewing the recorded data. Impressed by the result, on the computer printout he circled 6EQUJ5 and wrote 3 letters beside it. WOW. Leading to the event's famous name. The signal lasted for the full 72-second window during which Big Ear was able to observe it, but has not been able to detect it since, despite several attempts by Amon and others. It remains, this 2020, the strongest candidate for an extraterrestrial radio transmission ever detected. To this day, nobody can explain the signal, even though many have tried, claiming it could have just come from us. I don't know. What do you think? Number 4. Harvard's psilocybin experiments. Operation Midnight Climax, 1954, consisted of a series of CIA-run safe houses and what went on inside them in San Francisco, California, and New York City. In 1960, 2 psychologists, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, ordered psilocybin from a Swiss company named Sandoz, with the intention to test if different administration modes lead to different experiences. They believed that psilocybin could be the solution for the emotional problems of the human brain. The first test group was 38 people of various backgrounds. 167 subjects in total participated in the study, willing or unwilling. In 1961, Leary decided to orient the study towards psilocybin mushrooms and the rehabilitation of prison inmates. The San Francisco safe houses were closed in 1965, and the New York City safe houses soon followed in 1966. Operation Midnight Climax and Project MK Ultra were considered to be so secretive that few people, even of the highest government positions, knew of their existence. Midnight Climax being a sub-project of MK Ultra's The Mind Control research program that began in the late 1950s by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was a chemist of the CIA. Unlike Project Artichoke, Operation Midnight Climax gave Gottlieb permission to test drugs on unknowing citizens, which made way for the legacy of this operation. Hundreds of federal agents, field operatives, and scientists worked on these programs before they were shut down in the mid-1960s. Science or sinister? Number 3. Exercise Tiger. Exercise Tiger, or Operation Tiger, was a series of large-scale rehearsals for the D-Day invasion of Normandy 1944, in which the military's lack of communication resulted in friendly fire from an Allied convoy being destroyed by German submarines, resulting in the deaths of at least 750 Americans. Wow. Of the 2 ships assigned to protect the convoy, only one was present. The second ship that was supposed to be present had been in a collision, suffered damage, and had to be repaired in secrecy. Because Allies' naval headquarters were operating on different frequencies, the American forces did not know this, and the first practice assault took place and was marked by an incident involving friendly fire. They didn't know it was an exercise. Set for 7:30 a.m., it was to include live ammunition to acclimatize the troops to the sights, sounds, and smells of war. This followed an order made by General Dwight Eisenhower, who felt that the men must be hardened by exposure to real battle conditions. Several of the ships landing that morning were delayed until 8:30, an hour later, and some landing craft didn't even receive word of the change at all. Landing on the beach at their original scheduled time, the second wave came under fire, suffering an unknown number of casualties. Rumors circulated along the fleet that as many as 450 men were killed, and it remained in secrecy in classification memos for numerous years after. I've seen Saving Private Ryan, and I can only imagine what this site looked like. Number 2. The Manhattan Project. Nuclear fission by chemists in 1938 made the development of the atomic project a theoretical possibility. The Manhattan Project was a research and development exercise during World War II that produced the first nuclear weapons. It was led by the United States with the support of the United Kingdom and Canada. Nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer was the director of the Los Alamos laboratory that designed the actual explosives. The Army component's first headquarters were in Manhattan, hence the name, the place name, and the official code name. The project began in 1939 and employed more than 130,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion to fund. Research and production took place at more than 30 sites across the US, United Kingdom, and Canada. During 1939, physicists drafted the Einstein-Szilard letter, which warned of the potentials of this extremely powerful creation of a new type. They had it signed by Albert Einstein and delivered to President Roosevelt. In 1941, President Roosevelt approved the atomic program, and Roosevelt chose the Army to run the project rather than the Navy because the Army had more experience with large budget scientific projects. Plutonium was then chemically separated from the uranium by scientists, and the Fat Man and Little Boy implosion weapons were created at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. The first nuclear device ever detonated was the Trinity test, conducted at New Mexico's Alamogordo Range 1945. Little Boy and Fat Man explosives were used a month later in the atomic droppings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the immediate post-war years, the Manhattan Project conducted weapons testings, development of new weapons, promoted and supported medical research into radiology, and it maintained control over American atomic weapons research until the formation of the United States Atomic Energy Commission in 1947. Classified stuff, people. These were very scary times. And coming in at number 1, the Philadelphia experiment. This one scares me, and I pray it really is a hoax because there's a lot of documents that relate to this subject around this time that don't really add up. The Philadelphia experiment was an alleged event witnessed by Carl Allen in the United States Navy shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in October 1943. Allen describes an experiment where the US Navy attempted to render itself invisible, cloaking the destroyer USS Eldridge, and the bizarre scientific events and results that followed. On Allen's account, the destroyer was successfully made invisible, but the ship inexplicably teleported to Norfolk, Virginia for several minutes and then reappeared back in the Philadelphia yard. The ship's crew is supposed to have suffered various side effects including insanity, intangibility, and being frozen in place. The story first surfaced in late 1955 when Allen sent a book full of handwritten letters referring to the experiment to a US Navy research organization. The US Navy maintains that no such experiment was ever conducted, that the details of the story contradict well-established facts about the USS Eldridge, and that the physics the experiments are claiming to be based on doesn't even exist. What do you think? I think this actually happened and the gruesome details of the side effects are just misinformation. I don't know. I get a weird feeling about this one. Too many science experiments at that time.
Number 5 on this list is the two-headed dog. This truly is a chilling story of one of the most well-known mad scientists in all of history. Vladimir Demikov was a Russian scientist who was fascinated with transplantology. Just how Dr. Zeus would make up words, well, our mad scientist did the same with transplantology. He coined the term and brought the world's attention to his very questionable experiments. He had become rather successful at transplanting organs between his favorite test subject, dogs. Giving one dog the organ of another dog and having that organ function, well, this was new science back then. This part of his work has actually done wonders in medical science for humans, as now transplanting an organ or donating one after you pass away is commonplace. What he does next, though, hasn't done that much for our medical practices at all, and just raised a bunch of controversy. Vladimir wanted to push the envelope and go as far as he possibly could with his experiments. This is what led him to the two-headed dog. This picture was taken in 1959 and shows one larger host dog, a German Shepherd, with the head of another smaller dog sticking out of it. An article written by Aaron Kelly writes, "Thanks to the team's wealth of experience, the operation took a mere 3.5 hours. After the two-headed dog was resuscitated, both heads could hear, see, smell, and swallow. Although Shavka's transplanted head could drink, she was not connected to Brogan's stomach. Anything she drank flowed through an external tube and onto the floor. In the end, this two-headed dog lived only 4 days. Had a vein in the neck area not accidentally got damaged, it may have lived even longer than Demikov's longest living two-headed dog, which survived 29 days. Even setting aside the deaths of the canine subjects, the moral implications of Demikov's experiments are tricky. This head transplantation, unlike some of his other advancements in the field of transplantology, had no real-life applications. Yet there were certainly very real implications for the dogs. So guys, my personal opinion here is that this should have been shut down from the first wind anyone got of it. The fact that it continued for as long as it did is honestly pretty sickening to me. Now we're just left with some of these creepy pictures of some experiments that really never should have happened. Number 4 on this list is the Salem UFO. This is one of the most famous photographs of a UFO to date, and one that people keep coming back to as potential proof for alien life. The image was captured on August 3rd, 1952, and as you can see, shows 4 bright orbs in the sky. This was taken in Salem, Massachusetts at Salem's Coast Guard Air Station. Now there's been many potential explanations thrown around about what this could be, but the most prominent is definitely aliens. Some have speculated that it could be a reflection of light, some weird looking clouds, or just a product of a 1950s camera malfunctioning. Now these are all possible, but I'm gonna be honest, these are some pretty strange looking things in this picture. They look pretty much exactly how one would imagine a UFO to look. It also just so happens that around this time, tons of other UFO sightings were happening as well. This could have just been a coincidence, or it could be an actual sighting because they were just actually flying around back then. Comment down below what you guys think about this image. Was it a freak camera thing, or was it actually a UFO? Number 3 on this list is the Amityville Ghost Boy. The Amityville Horror House is one of the scariest real-life ghost stories in human history. It all started when this home was host to a gruesome tragedy. Ronald Defoe Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family in this house in 1974. Those who were killed never really left though, and haunted the next people who lived in this home. The hauntings got so bad that our favorite real-life Ghostbusters came in to save the day, Ed and Lorraine Warren. This case has most likely gone down as their most famous in their time as being active paranormal specialists. Now the photo in question is of a young boy with bright white eyeballs. History vs. Hollywood writes, the photo below was allegedly taken inside the Amityville house in 1976. It's become one of the most famous paranormal photos of all time. It features what appears to be a young boy with white eyes who's peeking out of a doorway. George Lutz revealed the Amityville Ghost Boy photo on the Merv Griffin show back in 1979, 3 years after it was taken. The image was supposedly captured by Gene Campbell, a professional photographer who was part of the team who worked with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Gene had set up an automatic camera that took infrared pictures to capture the second floor landing during the night. Equipped with black and white film, his camera captured this Amityville Ghost Boy photo that some have speculated could be the ghost of the murdered child John Defoe, who'd lived in this house with his family prior to the Lutzes. How a child would have gotten into this home, what he would have been doing here, these are all the questions that we don't know and probably won't ever know. That's why for now anyways, the most probable explanation is that of a ghost. Number 2 on this list is the Dyatlov Pass. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a tragic event that occurred in 1959. 9 Russian hikers died on February 1st and February 2nd in some very strange, unexplained circumstances. Listen to what Wikipedia writes about the manner to which these bodies were found. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in the skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these had soft tissue damage of the head and face. 2 of the bodies were missing their eyes, 1 was missing its tongue, and 1 was missing its eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these. These are all plausible, but some other supernatural causes have also been thrown out there as well. Aliens, yetis, demons, these are all the things that people have speculated upon. The manner to which these people died is just so strange that it doesn't make sense. They were fine and then all of a sudden ran from the safety of their tents, not dressed for the elements. The picture that we have here is from just prior to this event taking place, and it's the last known image captured of these men alive. It's incredibly creepy because it looks as if they're walking into a snowy nothing. What was waiting for them in that nothing? It's anyone's guess. Number 1 on this list is the Brown Lady of Rainman Hall. This image was captured in the fall of 1936 while people were taking pictures of the house. The famous photo is of the central staircase and shows an image that looks strikingly like the ghost who resides here. The Brown Lady of Rainman Hall. This ghost is believed to be the spirit of Lady Dorothy Walpole, who used to live in this home many years ago. She died over 200 years ago under suspicious circumstances, and as the years passed, more people started seeing her ghost appear around the residence. These rumors obviously exploded though after this photo was caught, showing the world that this poltergeist could potentially be real. The reason that I think this photo is the closest thing we have to real evidence of a ghost is because there were literal stories already surrounding a ghost at this location. It's one thing to take a photo and see something weird on it and then think, oh, maybe that's a ghost, but it's a complete other thing when there's already been rumors circulating about this ghost for centuries. Everything adds up. It makes sense why there'd be a poltergeist standing in the staircase, and we even know who it is. Yes, 1930s cameras are shoddy to say the least, but when there's this much lore surrounding it, I tend to think that we may have gotten lucky and gotten an actual gem of a photograph proving the existence of a ghost. And if that's the case, then it isn't an exaggeration to say that this could be the most haunted photograph ever. Number 5 on this list is Thomas de Torquemada. This is a name that is often forgotten. Thomas isn't often talked about in the same conversations as some of the other people on this list. He didn't kill as many people as some of the other people here, but don't think for a second he wasn't as evil. Had he the means to do so, he assuredly would have killed far more people than he did, and he still killed a ton. Next Luxury writes, the first Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Torquemada was a religious zealot. Like many in Spain during the 14th century, he believed Catholicism was the one true religion, and anyone who disagreed had to be punished. The Spanish Inquisition was established to help combat heresy, but actually helped solidify those in power who ruled through fear and violence. De Torquemada was one of the nastiest members of the Spanish Inquisition who used brutal torture methods to get confessions from prisoners. He was also responsible for burning thousands of non-believers at the stake. It wasn't even enough for you to convert to Catholicism, this guy would still come after you even if you did. If he thought you converted because of fear or some other reason he deemed unfit, then he'd force you to wear certain garments and torture you. Heretics would get waterboarded and then often killed afterwards. He saw to the expulsion of over 40,000 Jews from Spain as well. He kicked them out, only allowing them to leave with what they could carry, having to abandon their homes and their livelihoods. On top of this, he killed thousands of people too. This guy was absolutely messed up and would do anything in his power to keep Catholicism alive in Spain. I guarantee that if you lived in Spain during the 1500s, then this guy would definitely have been haunting your dreams. Number 4 on this list is Osama bin Laden. I think we all know this name, and I wouldn't be shocked if some of you have already been haunted in your dreams by it. Next Luxury writes, unlike many of the other evil people on this list, Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for the deaths of millions. He was officially held accountable for the deaths of 2,977 people. What makes him such a detestable individual was that the murders came about as a result of the September 11th attacks. This remains the deadliest terrorist attack in human history. The legend of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden was behind the planning of the horrendous attack on American soil. It took 10 years for the American government to find him, finally discovering him hiding out in a compound in Pakistan. An assault on the home was undertaken and bin Laden was shot on site, ending one of the longest manhunts and bringing some closure to those impacted by the September 11th attacks. This is the biggest terrorist attack in history that we are talking about here, guys. One that shook America and the entire world when it happened. I would have been too young to remember it at the time, but most people you talk to can remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news that this happened. I can't imagine having that much hate inside yourself to want to do that to so many innocent people. But that was what Osama bin Laden had. He was filled with hate. He ruined the lives of so many people, and for that reason, he has to make this list. Number 3 on this list is Idi Amin. Idi Amin was a horrible individual who was brutal in every sense of the word. He overthrew the government in Uganda in 1971 and was in power there until 1979 when he was finally ousted. During his time in power, he showed the world just how horrifically evil he was. History.com says, once in power, Amin began mass executions upon the Akoli and Lango Christian tribes that had been loyal to Obote and therefore perceived as a threat. He also began terrorizing the general public through the various internal security forces he organized, such as the State Research Bureau and Public Safety Unity, whose main purpose was to eliminate those who opposed his regime. In 1972, Amin expelled Uganda's Asian population, which numbered between 50 and 70,000, resulting in a collapse of the economy as manufacturing, agriculture, and commerce came to a screeching halt without the appropriate resources to support them. Throughout his oppressive rule, Amin was estimated to have been responsible for the deaths of roughly 300,000 civilians. One of the worst parts about all of this is that he never had to pay for these heinous acts. After he was ousted in 1979, he fled to Saudi Arabia and just lived out the rest of his life there under protection. He lived comfortably there after having caused so much pain and death just years prior. He lived like this for decades until he finally died in 2003 from natural causes. Idi Amin doesn't get nearly as much media coverage as he should. The atrocities that took place in Uganda during the 70s need to be talked about more and must be acknowledged. Millions of people during that time would have been living in total fear of this man. I think it's fair to assume he probably still haunts the dreams of those who had to live through this terrible trauma. Number 2 on this list is Joseph Stalin. Stalin is another one of those guys who just has to be on this list. His name is synonymous with evil and hatred and death. Next Luxury says, much like Hitler, Joseph Stalin was loved by his supporters and hated by everyone else. The dictator governed the Soviet Union from 1922 until his death in 1953. His communist identity was influenced by Marxism-Leninism, resulting in his own idea known as Stalinism. Throughout his rule, millions died, particularly during the famine of 1932 and 1933, thanks to his disruption of the economy. Stalin was also responsible for the Great Purge, where a further 1 million were imprisoned and around 700,000 executed. To this day, Stalin supporters revere him as a champion of the working class, looking past the ethnic cleansing and mass executions that happened during his time in power. Stalin's horrifying exploits are often overlooked because just a little further down the line, you do have the whole Adolf Hitler thing. Stalin was right up there though as being just as brutal. The way he treated the Ukrainian people was absolutely horrific. He starved them for the sake of starving them. We cannot have another one of these individuals in our world ever again. We barely made it out the first time that we had one. Number 5 on this list is the expeditions of Ernest Giles. Ernest Giles really only has himself to blame when it comes to his expeditions because he went on 4 separate ones. You'd think that he would have learned his lesson after the first one, but I guess not. Ernest Giles lived from 1835 to 1897 and was an explorer of Australia. Not much was known about Australia at this point other than the fact that it was pretty big. Ernest Giles wanted to shed some light on the country and made it his mission to explore the continent. His first expedition was in 1872 and was decently successful. Him and 2 other men wandered around the continent and discovered some interesting landmarks on the way. The second one wasn't nearly as well thought out though. Ernest set out on an expedition with 1 other man named Alfred Gibson. Apparently Alfred Gibson knew absolutely nothing about exploring in the desert though, so this was a pretty silly move to have this guy be your one partner. At the 8-month mark, the 2 were deep into the Australian wilderness when one of the horses died of thirst. This was pretty problematic and meant that one guy was either walking or getting left behind. Well, for Ernest, it was a little bit of both. Somehow they came to the conclusion that Alfred Gibson would take the horse and ride on ahead and Ernest would travel the rest on foot. The insane part about this though is that Ernest actually survived and Gibson didn't. Gibson was never heard or seen again and presumably perished in the desert. Whereas Ernest, after an 8-day walk with no food, carrying a massive cask of water on his back and hallucinating the entire way, managed to survive. The one piece of food that he had in the 8-day journey was a baby walleye, and he wrote in his journal that he pounced upon it, ate it, living, raw, dying, fur, skin, bones, skull, and all. Guys, I'm totally cool with going on the occasional hike, but that whole thing, that's a bit extreme for me. Number 4 on this list is David Livingstone's expedition. David Livingstone lived from 1813 to 1873 and was a Scottish physician and also an explorer of Africa. He was notably most fascinated with the Nile River and where it came from. That's why in 1866 he decided to set out with a group of local guides on foot to discover where this river actually originated from. Clearly Livingstone didn't conduct the hiring process well enough though, because these guides, they weren't to be trusted. They led him for a time, but soon started to become bored of this expedition and realized that they had all the power in this relationship. They abandoned him, with some of them even stealing a few of his supplies. When they got back to society and were asked about his whereabouts, they told everyone inquiring that he had just died in the jungle. This was a pretty bad situation for Livingstone to find himself in, but it actually gets a lot worse. He trekked through the jungle by himself for a time, but eventually had completely run out of supplies and had to get assistance from someone. Lucky for him, there were some passing slave traders that used this route often. Unluckily for him though, they brought him to the village of Bambara. Clearly the villagers here were not accustomed to seeing a white person and were pretty shocked by this. They responded by taking Livingstone and putting him into a zoo. That's right guys, David Livingstone was put into a roped off cage so that he could be an attraction for those passing through the village. Finally, someone who knew Livingstone heard of this man that was caged up and came to his rescue. When he got there though, Livingstone wasn't in the best shape. Extremely malnourished, crippled, and currently dying of malaria, he'd definitely seen some better days. He was saved from the cage, but didn't last too much longer after that, eventually dying from disease. This story just goes to show you that if you're gonna get a guide, make sure it's somebody that you can trust. Number 3 on this list is the South Pole Expedition. Sir Ernest Shackleton was an Anglo-Irish Antarctic explorer who lived from 1874 to 1922. After hearing about his 1914 expedition to Antarctica though, it's actually a miracle that this guy made it all the way to 1922. The explorer had the goal of making it across Antarctica. They'd intended to take a ship, land on the continent, and then trek across it to the other side. What they were going to do when they got to the other side is anyone's guess, but luckily they never even needed to worry about that part. No, the issues for them happened far earlier. As they were sailing to Antarctica, they started slowing down and slowing down and slowing down until they finally stopped completely. They realized that the water around them had turned to ice and they were now frozen in place. Rather than get out and walk it, they decided to wait until the ice thawed and then they would keep going. They apparently sat on that ship waiting for this to happen for 10 months though. Then at the 10-month mark, the ice didn't break and their ship just actually sank. So now we have this group of explorers without much supplies, stranded on the ice in the middle of an ocean. They were smart enough to save their lifeboat though and managed to take it and themselves to the nearest landmass. By this point, the expedition was completely ruined and now they just needed to focus on survival. They had to leave some men behind, and Ernest and some other guys got in a lifeboat and decided to sail it over 800 miles in the ocean. It should also be noted that this was during World War I, so if they ran into the wrong ship, then it could have all been over for them anyways. They made it to land and then they realized that to get to people, they actually needed to climb an entire mountain range. And believe it or not, they actually did and finally made it to some civilization on South Georgia Island. This expedition didn't lose as many men as some other ones, but pretty much anything that could go wrong did go wrong. The fact that anyone survived is truly pretty miraculous. Number 2 on this list is Ferdinand Magellan's expedition to the Philippines. So you probably remember the name Ferdinand Magellan from history class growing up. If you don't though, he was a Portuguese explorer best known for his expedition to the East Indies across the Pacific Ocean. The actual expedition resulted in completely new trade routes opening up and the discovery of the interoceanic passage. This was definitely a success, but it wasn't quite as nice for Magellan or most of his crew to be honest. Out of the 260 people that left for this expedition in 1519, only 18 actually survived and made it back home 2 years later. The biggest problem that took most of the lives of these explorers was food supplies. Back then, no one had any idea how big the ocean actually was and how long it would take them to sail across it. Therefore, the food and water that they brought along with them was woefully insufficient in feeding 260 men for an extended period of time. Several months went by on the high seas and the supplies started to wear thin. With no sign of land in sight, the crew had to resort to drastic measures. It started with crumbs that were filled with maggots, then moved on to cooked leather that was on the boat, then went straight to sawdust, and then finally to any rats that they could find. This was just for food though. For drink, they had to have yellow water. I feel like I don't need to explain what that is, but I can promise you that it wasn't pretty. Many people died from disease and malnourishment on the boat before they finally reached the Philippines. Here, they were attacked by a bunch of natives and Magellan was stabbed in the face with a spear. So I suppose that you could argue that this expedition wasn't cursed since they actually did reach their destination, but 18 out of 260 is a pretty rough ratio of survivors, and drinking pee-pee water while eating boat leather, I mean, that doesn't sound too great either. Number 1 on this list is the Spanish expedition to the Gulf of Mexico. Back in the early 1500s, there was a craze in Europe for acquiring gold. This was especially true about the gold in the Americas, this magical new land of resources that had recently been discovered. Well, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, and yeah, that's his actual real name, was a Spanish explorer who wanted to get in on the action. He decided to organize an expedition to America right around where Florida is, get his share of the gold, come back to Spain, and be a rich man. This didn't work out the best for him or countless men that he decided to bring along though. The Spanish explorer managed to round up about 600 other Spaniards to come along in this expedition for gold. They set off from Spain and actually managed to cross the Atlantic without too much of a hitch. When they got to what's now the Dominican Republic in a layover, they did lose roughly 100 of the men though. Now this wasn't too bad because they still had about 500 and the 100 men just decided that they were done with the mission and wanted to stay in the Dominican, but it was the beginning of the bad luck for the remaining crew. After leaving this layover, they immediately got hit with a massive hurricane which killed tons of men and lots of their horses. Then, when the remainder of the crew arrived in Florida, not only were lots of their supplies already lost, but they had to fight off countless waves of native attacks. They were losing miserably and had to get out, so apparently they broke down their weapons and supplies and tried to make some makeshift boats to get away from where they were. This actually worked for a little bit, right up until they got hit with another hurricane and fell into the sea. At that point, the roughly 80 men that survived this had to get to shore, but very quickly when they did, got enslaved by the native people that had been attacking them in the first place. 10 years later, 4 men managed to cross into a Spanish colony in Mexico, claiming that they were the only 4 men left from the initial expedition that set out a decade ago. 4 men out of 600. I have no idea what cursed this expedition, but this thing, it was doomed the second they left Spain. Number 5 on this list is the Catholic persecution in Britain. This happened in the 16th and 17th century and was really not a good time to be alive if you were Catholic. The list first says, Britain has been trying to rebrand its historical image with tea and monocles, though it's hard to do given how violent its history has been. We're not even talking about the colonies here. A civilian in Old Britain may die in a variety of ways depending on the time period. The worst, however, would have probably been during the Catholic Rebellion and their eventual persecution. It was generally a time of upheaval in Europe, largely over the question of which kind of Christianity is the best one. The situation was especially bad in England as the ruling Protestants really did not like the Catholic population. If you were suspected of being a Catholic or harboring one, there were a number of creatively horrifying ways you could die. One woman was slowly and publicly crushed to death simply for refusing to talk when she was questioned for supporting the Catholics. You could be drawn and quartered, hung, or just lynched by a mob. The mob thing was rare as the central authorities made sure to intervene and kill you themselves before the situation got so out of hands. How nice of them. Yeah, so just a casual death by public crushing for maybe supporting Catholicism. This is a time in history that I feel doesn't get brought up nearly enough based on what happened. In all honesty, I didn't even really know about this time until I started doing some research for this video. Maybe that is because the British government has tried to do a full rebrand and doesn't really want to bring up the dark past of what was once one of the worst times to be alive. Throughout history, people have consistently been persecuted for their beliefs and how they want to live their lives. This was one of the worst examples of that in history, and it's definitely not a time that you would have wanted to be alive. Number 4 on this list is the Siege of Sarajevo. This time really isn't that far off from us at all, folks. This siege took place from 1992 to 1996. Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia, and had you have lived in this place during that time, life would have been hell. List first says, sieges are an overall bad time to be in, and we highly recommend not being in one if it could be helped. Some of the most prolonged sieges in history history, like the Siege of Leningrad, have been huge humanitarian disasters too, as sieges primarily affect the citizens. One particularly horrifying siege that isn't mentioned that often is the Siege of Sarajevo by the Serbs, which is also the longest siege of a capital city in modern history. It went on for almost 4 years, and close to 14,000 people ended up dying. If the incessant shelling on primarily civilian areas like the market didn't get you, you could die in many other ways. People were dying just from the harsh cold, as there were no fuel supplies in many parts of the city. Quite a few of them had to move into shared spaces with other families without any amenities, turning an otherwise functioning city into a giant refugee camp. Many people were killed by snipers who deliberately targeted civilians. Think about being a citizen in that city during that time. Your entire life is literally just about surviving at that point. And not just for a week or for a month, for literally 4 years. 4 years of constant attack in horrible conditions to live in. 4 years of fearing that you and your family are gonna be killed. 4 years of freezing and having no good food to eat at all. And this literally happened not that long ago, guys. This just as easily could have been one of us that was caught living there. You were just in the wrong place in the wrong time, and now your life is uprooted and you need to fight to stay alive. Number 3 on this list is the Sengoku period. This was a period that took place in Japan from about 1467 to 1600. This verse says, the Sengoku period, lasting over 100 years, was one of the most defining parts of Japanese history, as well as one of the most influential. A lot of historical Japanese pop culture is set in that period, as it was a time of consistent war and rapidly shifting political climate. There were more warlords fighting for territory than you could count, as the central power of the shogun had weakened in recent times. For someone living in that period, war and suffering would have been part of your daily life. Apart from opposing factions regularly raiding villages and towns for supplies, civilians were often caught between battles they had nothing to do with. Of course, that wasn't the case in every village across Japan, as many of them thrived due to the shifting landscape too. For those caught between the battles or just lost in the vast swaths of ungoverned Japanese territory though, it was a dangerous time to be in. The period was noteworthy for its brutality and general disregard for human life, and gave way to some of the most fearsome samurai warriors in Japanese history. There are a few documentaries on this time period of Japan, and they were all very informative and super interesting. It's pretty neat to look back now and see what was going on, but back then, having to live through it, that would have been horrible. It really was like a massive game of Risk that everyone was playing. And even if you were just a farmer trying to survive, it didn't matter. You were now caught up in this massive game of Risk, and your life was constantly on the line. Number 2 on this list is the Roman Empire. Okay, wait, I thought the Roman Empire was supposed to be one of the greatest empires ever. Well, it was. And if you were one of the leaders or a member of the elite class during this time, then you were laughing. But for some, it wasn't as nice. Specifically, the miners. The Roman Empire had a lot of slaves, mostly people that were taken from conquered territories and forced to work for the Romans. The worst possible place that you could be sent though was the mines. If you were a slave and you got sent to the Roman Empire mines, then life, it's about to get horribly bad. The conditions were awful down there. Mining was relatively new back then, and there wasn't really any advanced technology to help these people. Not that they would have received any help anyways though. The Romans were brutal to these people, and specifically handpicked people they didn't like to be sent down there. Disease was widespread because people were literally worked to death and never cleaned. They were given very little food, and if they weren't producing quick enough, then they would just be killed. And oftentimes, these killings were of amusement to the guards as well, and they would mutilate you or throw you in a pit with a hungry wild animal. There were literally no redeeming qualities to the mines at all, and you probably wished for death if you got sent there. And finally, number 1 on this list is the year 536. Kind of a specific year here, folks, but from what I've heard, it was literally the worst. This verse says, when us laymen talk about the worst times in history, we're thinking of stuff like violence and proximity to cannibalism. We don't have any scientific parameters to measure how bad a time is for the people living in it, though we can make educated guesses. When it comes to actual scientists though, they don't bother with guesses or estimates, and have calculated the exact year it was the worst time to be alive in history, the year 536. Apart from the falling empires the world over and general political chaos, the year 536 also marked one of the worst global famines in human history. The famine was due to ash in the air blocking the sunlight, which isn't surprising as there were also quite a few humongous volcanic eruptions around that time for good measure. The foggy eclipse of the sun, as it was described then, was visible everywhere in the world, giving the whole thing an even creepier vibe. Combine that with brutal conflicts in many places around the world, and you know why the researchers chose the year 536 to be the absolute worst one in history. So basically, year 536 was just hell on earth. Everyone was either dying or fighting, or they were dying of not having any food at all. It's kind of crazy to think that only a few thousand years ago, this could have been us. Nowadays, farming is so advanced that most of us are in a pretty good place when it comes to food, but back then, if the river dried up or the sun didn't come out, that was it, guys. We just aren't going to be eating anymore. Just be thankful that the year is 2022 right now and not 536.
And at number 5. Serial killers. I'm not talking about Lucky Charms and Cheerios, although I single-handedly could kill a box of cereal in like 10 minutes. Throughout history, humankind has shown us that it is capable of some pretty horrific things. Things that not only push along the evolution of our species, but slows it down, horrifies us, and downright disgusts us. Starting this list off, there are way too many serial killers throughout history to choose from, so I'm gonna focus really on one person in particular, H.H. Holmes. Herman Webster Mudgett, or notoriously and forever known as H.H. Holmes. This was a special type of serial killer because he is known not only today for being America's very first serial killer, but one of the most prolific. People definitely killed people before then, but what this man concocted only reinforces what made this person a threat to Satan himself. After moving to Illinois around the time of the 1893 Chicago Fair, Holmes set up constructing a 3-story hotel on the corner of West 63rd Street for weary travelers. Sounds pretty kind of him. One catch. This mansion, or later known as Murder Castle, was a labyrinth of specifically designed and constructed torture rooms. A number of rooms were found to have hidden peepholes, trapdoors built into the floorboards, and even pipes through the walls that Holmes would pump gas into to be breathed in by the unexpected guests. A maze of secret passages, ladders, and hallways, eventually all leading towards chutes to the basement, the end of the maze and the final room, fully equipped with surgical tables and a furnace. Holmes was eventually arrested in 1896 for the murder of 4 people, but what makes this person one of the worst is before he was hanged, he admitted to killing at least 27 more in his sick, twisted funhouse. Although serial killers have made famous through the years, Holmes takes the cake due to his clever, innovative, and downright disgusting mind to torment his guests. This is basically just all the Saw movies stewed into one giant maze. Absolutely sickening. Number 4. Vlad the Impaler. Dracula. Before capes and fake fangs, people were afraid of people solely from reputation alone. You didn't need to dress frightening one night of the year to really scare the bejesus out of someone. I'm talking about real life. Vlad the Impaler was the second of 4 brothers born into a noble family of Vlad II Dracul. His name was derived from the Latin Draco, after his father's induction into the Order of the Dragon, created by Holy Roman Empire Sigismund, responsible for defending Christian Europe against the threatening Ottoman Empire. Vlad is believed to have been born in what is now Transylvania, central region of modern Romania. His name and reputation would be given to him later due to the ordered impaling of some 500 enemy boyars. Vlad was tasked with leading a force to defend Wallachia, back then Romania, from invaders. During his 1456 battle to protect his home, he was victorious in hand-to-hand combat, but let's get to the stuff that really makes this guy terrifying. In some cases, which led to all cases, Vlad would order a pole or pike, usually carved from wood, to be rounded, not sharpened, to avoid damaging internal organs and thereby prolonging the suffering of the victim to death. A giant spear secured into the ground. Nasty. The pole was then raised vertically to display the victim's torment and could take hours or even days for the impaled person to die. This guy really made a mockery out of his victors and forever known as not only killing his opponents in battles and war, but displays their carcasses to any empire-threatening house of Dracul. Legend says that Bram Stoker's Dracula was based on the events and details of Vlad the Impaler, and it is best guessed that if there was someone going around killing hundreds of people, draining them of their blood whilst alive, it was probably Vlad. Number 3. Dictators and warlords. If you're a history buff like me, then you are well familiar with the atrocities carried out by leaders of regions trying to secure peace and place all around the world. These people, mostly men, make up most of the responsibility of the death of the humankind. Infection, disease, and plagues can't touch the amount of bodies leaders, dictators, and warlords have countlessly used in the universal game for turf and power. Some of these leaders have reigned in the last 100 years, and we can still feel the effects of their acts and wishes now. Some of these people even include Genghis Khan, a ruthless military leader of the Mongol forces wreaking havoc and torture amongst its enemies everywhere in Northeast Asia, somewhere around 40 million people. Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976. This man was one of the world's most notorious mass murderers, including somewhere around 200 million deaths. We felt, seen, and read the effects of the Germans during World War II, orders of highly educated scientists and doctors, the precise calculated ways to exterminate mass amounts of people under the guise of scientific knowledge about humankind. I'm not going to get into anything specific, and frankly, I don't even like saying some of these names out loud due to the disgusting acts that they've inflicted over the years. The amount of lives taken from the act of war will never be recorded accurately, and we'll never know how much of humankind was wasted for nothing kind at all. Some of these people are knocking on Satan's door as we speak, and I'm gonna let Big Guns downstairs just do what he does. Number 2. Guy de Rais. The nobleman slash serial killer had reportedly turned to the dark occult, a wooded practice sometime around 1435 when he tried to invoke up the devil himself to help him gain knowledge, power, and riches. Scholars have documented events such as this and have claimed that this man is the sole inspiration for the infamous fairy tale Bluebeard. However, the very true and real story of this Frenchman is much sicker in nature. A distinguished knight and once a lord who at one point served as a military commander for Joan of Arc in the 100 Years' War, Guy de Rais' reputation was somewhat besmirched when he was arrested for crimes relating to Satanism, abducting, and of course the countless murderings of numerous young adults. After his arrest in 1440, de Rais was put on trial, and though he was found guilty of abducting, torturing, and the murder of more than 140 people, terrifying in itself, many researchers and folklore believe it's somewhere around 800 young adults. I bring up de Rais because after researching about him, I understood why he deserves to sit at number 2. The Bluebeard-inspired life of de Rais can be read about, and in doing so, you'll soon realize why I'm racing through this atrocity of a man, and why he's number 2, and why he remains one of the most terrifying people who have ever walked this planet. And coming in at number 1, Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was and is still an unidentified serial killer active in poverty-ridden districts in and around East London in 1888. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of London, killing at least 5 women and mutilating their bodies in an unusual manner. The removal of internal organs led authorities to believe that the purpose that the killer had was anatomical or a surgical-based knowledge. Highly educated, even possibly being a doctor himself or surgeon. In October 1888, numerous letters were received by the media outlets, and authorities from the Scotland Yard had been proposing that there was a murder amidst the city. The name Jack the Ripper was born. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists in an attempt to heighten paranoia in storytelling and in newspaper sales. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, pseudo-history, and fear-inducing lore. What makes these murders so sickening and yet still so interesting is not only did they never find or identify the actual killer, but Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly came to a mysterious halt in the fall of 1888. But London citizens continued to demand answers that would never come. Then, or even now. The open and ongoing cases spawned attentions of writers, directors, and historians all around the world and continues to push the scientific method of evidence and DNA.
Number 5, Robert Liston. I figured I'd start with Robert Liston since he's a bit of an outlier on this list, because unlike the other ones, I don't know if he was truly evil, but he just enjoyed life much differently than the rest of us. You see, Robert Liston was a Scottish surgeon in the 19th century who had a pretty notable reputation. He was the fastest blade in the West End. He boasted that no one could slice and dice faster than he could if the legends about him are to be believed. He was allegedly able to perform a full amputation of a limb in 3 minutes, only losing 1 out of every 10 patients, which honestly, all things considered, is actually a pretty impressive feat, if not an absolutely terrifying one to think about. Liston didn't really have bedside manner to speak of though, and he would take a glee in his work that kind of bordered on sadism. He wasn't a mad scientist plotting world domination, but he was a particularly odd fellow who really reveled in how good he was at removing people's limbs. Everybody's got a hobby, everybody's got something that makes them happy. One particularly grisly anecdote says he once severed a leg in under 30 seconds and gleefully laughed to his crowd of spectators, "Time me, boys!" So evil? I don't know, maybe not. Questionable? Absolutely. Would I hang out with this guy? Probably not while he was working. The issue with Liston is that while he definitely had speed, and no one could argue that, accuracy was not always his strongest suit. Frequently, his rush work would result in his patients having unnecessary complications and conditions such as dying. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Liston has the world's only surgery with a 300% mortality rate. In one occasion, he was working so quickly and carelessly that he amputated his assistant's own fingers off while attempting to sever a leg. And as he was doing this, he swung the knife backwards and ended up hitting a spectator who fainted out of shock. The patient, the assistant, and the spectator all died a few days later, leading to the only surgery that managed to lead to the death of 3 people. That's an impressive record, if nothing else. And my friends, if you'd like to hear more freaky stories, true crime, cryptid sightings, UFO conspiracies, and just about everything scary under the sun and above it, why don't you give Top 5 Scary a subscribe for the best scary content on the net, and keep on screaming. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Jose Delgado. Do you think you could control a bull? I definitely don't. But Jose Delgado believed he could. He was a controversial researcher who believed that the best way to get an animal to behave was not by training it or teaching it a trick and giving it a treat every time it does the trick right, but to implant a series of electrodes into an animal's brain to be able to manually control it with a series of electroshocks. To make a lot of very complicated neuroscience comically short in layman's terms, he was creating remote control monkeys. And do you kind of want one now? Because I kind of want one. Delgado signed on to Yale University sometime in the 1950s, where he set up his little shop in a lab tinkering with all sorts of fun electronic experiments and gizmos to research new methods of control. Oftentimes, it was literally the flip of a switch that would alter the mood of a creature. The thing is, as scary as what he did, the results he was getting were unbelievable, stuff straight out of sci-fi. He was able to train monkeys by stimulating the parts of their brain that would activate aggression, and he would teach them how to manipulate other monkeys that were threatening them by flipping the switches of their aggression. It's nuts. Did you watch Westworld? I know you probably watched the first season at least. I've seen the viewership numbers. You know how in that show they could use those little tablets to open up like a cowboy robot's personality and alter all those stats like aggression, romance, bravery, etc, etc. Well, that's kind of what Delgado was doing, only on chimps instead of Evan Rachel Wood. One controversial experiment involved generating a painful sensation in a chimp's brain every time it produced a particular brain signal, which eventually led to the chimp learning not to think like that. Woof. Delgado's most infamous trial though was the one I mentioned at the beginning, stopping a bull in its tracks. He stood in front of a bull and like the matadors of legend, stared it down and used a shortwave radio and a series of electrodes to freeze it in place. Johnny Knoxville would have loved that. Now despite the controversial nature of his work, which inspired quite a good amount of debate and discussion about ethics, Delgado maintained up until his dying day that the work he was doing was for the benefit of mankind. He wasn't trying to develop mind control, nor did he see his experiments as a way to influence people, but rather he saw his work as a way to overcome mental illness eventually, and cure brain disorders, and also probably save the lives of a lot of bullfighters. Number 3, Giovanni Aldini. So I don't want to spoil too much about this guy right away, but all I'll say is that Giovanni Aldini would end up being the source of inspiration for the character of Victor Frankenstein from Mary Shelley's famous sci-fi novel. So you can probably sort of guess what kind of things this guy was gonna get up to without even having to listen to the next 2 minutes, but I'm sure you're very curious, so I'll explain it to you in great detail anyway. As a young boy, Giovanni was fascinated by his uncle, who was also a physician, and would watch him perform strange experiments. His uncle had an interest in reanimating the dead to see if it was possible to restore vigor to an animal that had passed, and he primarily tested on frogs, where he would attach electrical currents to them. These events, unsurprisingly, would very profoundly affect Giovanni, who sought out to recreate what his uncle had started, only on a much bigger target. It's man if you couldn't figure that out by now. As he grew older, Giovanni followed in his uncle's footsteps, zapping frog corpses, moving up to trying to reanimate a bull's head, until ultimately earning his place in mad science history when he started to begin his trials on humans. He sourced his bodies from executed prisoners, thinking, hey, they're done with them, I might as well use them. Trouble was that Italy tended to prefer execution methods that involved the head and the body going in separate directions, although Giovanni made use of this as well. He discovered that with an electric current, he could make a patient's face contort, and this was on a head detached from a body. There's a terrifying mental image for you for the day. It was then, when he started sourcing prisoners' bodies from England, that he started to inch closer and closer to that goal of reanimation. He asked for a body as fresh as possible, and he got one George Foster. Not the one who played for the Reds, though. Attaching probes to this body, astoundingly, he got the man to open an eye, shake his jaw, and seemingly take a breath. This would end up being his last experiment, however, and he deemed the experiment a failure because the thing didn't sprung to life Frankenstein style. Chin up! I bet you'd love to know that your legacy was inspiring one of the most famous horror stories ever about a lunatic doctor who electrifies a corpse. Number 2. Albert Krigman. Now, I feel like it bears mentioning before I even talk about all the twisted, weird stuff that he did to earn his place in this list of evil scientists that Krigman just sounds like an evil scientist name, does it not? Like if you were writing a movie script, Krigman would be the stand-in name for your evil scientist before you could come up with a better one. Anyway, I digress. Dr. Albert Krigman was a dermatologist who was commissioned by Dow Jones and the US Army to research the effects of chemical compounds on human skin. Oh, yep, this is not going anywhere good. It goes without saying, but like he wasn't checking for Head and Shoulders 3-in-1 conditioner. Krigman was offered a modest lump sum of 10 grand in grant money to research, and he set up shop right away in Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia, where he got a near endless supply of test subjects, or victims, to experiment on with very little regard for their safety or hygiene. It was documented that the experiments at Holmesburg Prison included hair transplants, implementation of foreign bodies, burns and radiation of the skin, exposure to dioxin, application and ingestion of toxic and near lethal doses of acne medicine, and the yanking of fingernails. Ugh. I completely understand if you need a moment to just kind of catch yourself. And editors, I'm so sorry for the pictures you guys are looking at for this video. You guys work hard. Alright, let's get back to talking about stomach-churning evil done in the name of science. One of the main compounds Krigman researched that I listed off in that little list before was dioxin, the main ingredient of Agent Orange, the infamously evil chemical weapon the USA used during the Vietnam War. Inmates would be scarred, left sick with permanently disfiguring skin conditions leading to very painful side effects. Oftentimes too, many subjects were exposed to all sorts of contaminants and other infections from other conditions he was doing, other experiments he was doing. He did not keep a clean workspace. Krigman destroyed many of the notes from his research, but through testaments from his victims, we know the truth of what he got up to. While there were attempts to get justice after the fact for what the inmates experienced, Krigman himself lived to the age of 93 and never faced any sort of consequences whatsoever for his actions. In fact, the worst part is Krigman loved what he did. Take a listen to this spine-chilling real quote from a real scientist who was really hired by the US Army. All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time. That sounds like it's from one of the Saw movies. Are you kidding me? Okay, moving on. Somehow there's a guy who tops this. And finally, number 1, Sidney Gottlieb. Unlike the other scientists on this list, where I would offer a little bit of leeway onto whether or not you could truly consider them to be vile and evil outright, or just, a bit morally flexible in the name of progress, I actually feel very decent taking a stance and saying Sidney Gottlieb was pure evil. Gottlieb was an American chemist and spy master who helmed the CIA's infamous MK Ultra program. Surely, if you've watched even 2 videos featuring me, you have heard me yell like a lunatic about the MK Ultra program. The CIA's very real, very well documented, very traceable mind control program that they were very really researching in the 60s and 70s. And this lovely son of a gun was behind most of it. Gottlieb is about as close to the pop culture definition of an evil scientist as you can get. He believed that there was a way to influence the human mind to ensure global domination for the United States. At the height of the Cold War, the CIA believed that China and Russia had advancements in mind control technology and they needed to catch up. Gottlieb was commissioned to run a series of experiments. Initially, the goal was to develop a truth serum. Gottlieb would experiment with just about every single illegal, illicit substance you could on humans, most of the time without them knowing what he was doing. He tested on volunteers volunteers, prisoners, homeless, but most often people had no idea the nature of his experiments, and he tended to pick people who had nothing left and had a lot to gain. After months and months of this left him unsatisfied, he was granted extra powers and resources for his experiments, gaining the full funding of the US Army. The goal of MK Ultra was to develop techniques that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. Wow. This included torment like electroshock, sensory and sleep deprivation, all kinds of illicit substances, physical and mental damage, and so much more we can't even talk about. Eventually, the program was officially disbanded, citing that it was difficult to control the human psyche in this way. Gottlieb would stick around, however, since he had a real taste for doing evil science, and would helm the CIA's Poison Research Division, looking into just about every way you could conceivably poison a human being, including one infamous poisoned cigar for one Fidel Castro. Gottlieb retired in relative obscurity, never seeing any justice for his work, and lived out his days quietly in Virginia, largely forgotten by history. Well, not by me. Sorry, if you're the real life inspiration for Papa on Stranger Things, you're gonna be the #1 evil scientist on this list.
Coming in at number 5, Thomas Midgley Jr. This man is somewhat to blame for the absolute ludicrous gas prices right now. You'd be absolutely amazed what $50 can get you, all about 9 feet. But this man isn't in charge of inflation, no, this man is the man who invented leaded gasoline. Invented in the early 1920s, chemist Thomas Midgley Jr. was working on some pretty cutting-edge chemistry. His task was to conjure a way to enhance automotive gasoline to reduce or eliminate the problem of engine knocking. TEL, or better known as tetraethyllead, was an additive mixed with gasoline to do exactly that. And on December 9th, Tommy here unwillingly and unknowingly created what is to be the most destructive, biodangerous chemical compound, slowly and efficiently destroying our atmosphere. Long story short, this guy created the world's worst pollutant known to us so far, lead. Lead is a naturally occurring metal found in Earth's crust. Its widespread use has resulted in aggressive human environmental contamination. Companies GM and Standard Oil formed the Ethel Corporation shortly hereafter to produce TEL. The company's name was carefully chosen to avoid the use of the word lead. Yeah, don't just take it right out. right out. Of course, shortly after its production, workers began suffering what would become lead poisoning, which resulting, not long after it opened, workers at the Ethel plant began suffering from poisoning, which in 1922, the US Public Health Service warned of the dangers of lead production and leaded fuel. However, the phase out of leaded gasoline wasn't officially banned until about 1996, and even in some places the early 2000s. It is estimated that 7 million tons of lead were released into the atmosphere from gasoline in the United States alone, and due to its popularity and production rates since the 1920s, it has been estimated by scientists that its result on the Earth accounted for about 900,000 deaths and about 22 million years of healthy life lost. I am not making a bold statement here and saying that this man shouldn't have been born. Maybe he could have been like a pilot or something, or a dentist. I don't know. Number 4, Gottlieb Kirchhoff. If you're anything like me and are addicted to the sweeter side of life, well then this one's for you. Seems like our boys here have something in common, but trying to find a solution actually led to creating something way worse. Gottlieb Kirchhoff was a German-Russian chemist who, through the use of his pharmacy, accidentally invented one of the world's worst things for you. The bittersweet part is that it's sugar. Well, high fructose sugar actually. Basically the thing that makes everything taste good. From sody pop to candy. Fructose or high fructose corn syrup is made by diluting cornstarch with hydrochloric acid? Excuse me, can I have the hydrochloric acid on the side? I actually just got a root canal. Yeah, thank you. But the bittersweet part comes from the effects. See, this guy had no idea the impact of his tasty formula would have on the body. Basically, this stuff is in everything we eat and drink. To give you some numbers, kills about 1 million people a year. And I'm lowballing. Messes up our body, regulates our energy levels, and is responsible for the diabetes crisis and one of the leading causes of death from disease for humans. That's not so sweet. Next time you eat or drink anything, just look at the label. See what's in it. This guy thought he was doing us all a favor, making things tastier, making things deadlier, dude. I tried to mix this list up a bit instead of repeating main players we know who've created or been responsible for all the atrocities, and I chose Kirchhoff to be on this list for the impact that he would have on the future. I'm looking at the long game here. And if this guy wasn't born, then we probably could have avoided this breakthrough chemical discovery. And unless I'm Kyle Reese from The Terminator, we'll never know. Number 3, Alfred Nobel. We're sort of seeing a pattern here. These people had somewhat of a good intention that later turned out to be not so good, which led us to even asking, were they even supposed to be born at all? Cruel, but food for thought. Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist, engineer, inventor, and philanthropist, and known for having sacrificed his entire fortune to establish the Nobel Prize, holding 355 patents of his own in his own lifetime. Smarty pants. Nobel's most famous invention? Dynamite. A safer and easier way of harnessing the explosive power of nitroglycerin. That sentence in itself is hilarious. And in 1867, it would soon be used worldwide for mining and infrastructure development, and oh yeah, pretty much blowing anything and everything up ever since. And of course, let's not forget the impact of dynamite's effect on a person, place, or thing in its vicinity. We've all seen the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And this guy invented it. Dynamite. The stick, wick, and patented chemical compound was harnessed to do exactly that. And if we've read anything at all, it did a lot of bad. First off, how do you exactly tinker and tailor with an explosion? What happens when you can't crack the code? He's just in his basement like messing around with vials. Just a little bit more of that, little bit of this, and get down! The fact that this man did not blow himself up in any of these experiments is beyond me, and not only was this invention a new form of mass energy, in fact the Nobel Prize was created and named after him. He was the first. This invention and contribution was so ahead of its time in chemistry that it revolutionized the need to push evolution ahead through science. Its creation in itself is history for mankind. The dichotomy alone. Had this man known about all the cliche train track damsel in distress westerns that would have been parodied of his destructive invention, I don't know if he would have invented it in the first place. What do you think? Number 2, the Angel of Death. Okay, this guy definitely had it coming for sure with this list. The Angel of Death was a nickname given to this person for the disturbing amount of research he had collected via his specific scientific experiments. Why I think he shouldn't have been born at all is because to attain such groundbreaking information about the human body and its extremes, experiments needed to be run and not hypothesized. Joseph Mengele was a SS officer, doctor, and German scientist during World War II, and resulted in the leading of research closely related to the extremes and limitations of the capability of the human body, via DNA, via manipulation, and disease prevention, immunization, you name it. Any effect on the human body and its environment around them. I'm not going to get into what this person concocted up in his time as a medical captain, nor am I really going to make any jokes. This person pushed scientific research through the use of cruelty and pure evilness. Plain and simple. I don't like glorifying these people in these lists, and I can barely stand saying some of their names out loud. We know all of these people. Though the actual number of people's lives countlessly lost due to this man's sick fascination with pushing research and his scientific envelope hasn't been officially documented, these experiments were responsible for the deaths of somewhat of 6 million innocent lives. It is very clear that this person's intent was to derive violence, fear, and cruelty from day one, which I myself wish this person was never born. Crimes against humanity. No good. And number 1, nuclear fission. J. Robert Oppenheimer was an American theoretical physicist and was director of the Los Alamos Laboratory during the Manhattan Project, responsible for the research and creation of the very first atomic bomb. He is often known as the father of the atomic bomb, and his research in 1945 with nuclear fission, the result of smashing atoms into each other with a mass energy containment resulting in a massive explosion. A massive explosion, and that is an understatement. Just Google mushroom cloud. Scientists first developed nuclear technology during World War II. Thankfully, atomic bombs have been used only twice in war, both times by the United States, at the end of World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fat Man and Little Boy were the official names given to the two explosive devices. Charming. What makes this so terrifying is that due to this research, the act of war and the structure of battles are now a thing of prehistoric past. The mass execution that these inventions can do is nuclear. Literally. I put Oppenheimer at the top of this list because the devastation alone due to the future with merely the technology surfacing is detrimental in itself. This is actually the first time reports that a visitor from another galaxy started. These explosions were so giant that its effect could be felt off planet. Yo, that's next level. Aliens just pulling up. Yeah, that's not really good, you know. If there was a time in the future which we could send back AI, it would probably be due to this stuff. Oppenheimer was awarded the Medal of Merit from President Harry Truman in 1946 for the push in science, even if its push was in the wrong direction. All these people given awards, it's like, hey, good job. It's terrible stuff, but cheers.